Meeting. Welcome, everyone. Good evening. It's 5:30 p.m. on Wednesday, February 9th, 2022. And this special meeting of the Sandpoint City Council is now called to order in council chambers at City Hall, 1123 West Lake Street, Sandpoint, Idaho. For the record, I'm Mayor Shelby Ronstadt presiding. Also present are councilors Kate McAllister, Deb Rule, Joel Espiro, Andy Grote, and Justin Dick. Councilor Jason Welker is absent. And he was going to recuse himself anyway because he has a personal relationship with one of the parties here this evening. Since that's the only meeting on the agenda, that's why he has chosen to not be here. We'll now rise for the Pledge of Allegiance. Pledge of allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, with liberty and justice for all. Are there any announcements from council? Any announcements from staff?
Mr. Mayor, not so much of an announcement, but this is probably the most appropriate place for members of the audience who would like to speak in the hearing tonight. If you want to speak either in favor or against or neutral, not a city resident, we have a pink form at the doorway where you've come in. So if you fill that out, if you hand it to me, then I will get it to the clerk and you'll have the opportunity to speak. Likewise, if you are a city resident, it's the blue form. So everyone, if you want to speak, will have an opportunity tonight. You just need to fill out a form. And if you decide you want to speak and didn't feel like you wanted to speak now, if you bring the form up, we're in the process of the public hearing. I'll get that to the clerk as well. We will have an opportunity for people online also.
Okay, thank you. So the item on the agenda this evening is a public hearing and decision on an appeal regarding a conditional use permit requested by ZPD Lincoln LLC under city application number P21-0004 for a proposed 13-unit multifamily development at 624, 626, and 628 North Lincoln Avenue and 1809 Main Street in the residential multifamily or RM zone. The permit was approved with conditions by the Sandpoint Planning and Zoning Commission on December 7th, 2021. The commission's decision has been appealed to City Council by James and Leanna Nixon, city application number PAPL 21-0004. A notice of public hearing was published in the Bonner County Daily Bee on January 11th, 2022. The order and procedure for the public hearing will be as follows. First, explanation of the subject of the public hearing by city staff. Second, presentation by the applicant. Please note that council should address their questions to the applicant at this time. Third, presentation by the appellant. Council should address their questions to the appellant at that time. Fourth, opening of the public hearing, at which time the public may provide testimony. If council has any questions, they should be asked of those testifying at that time. The order for those providing testimony will be as follows. First, we'll hear from those who are in support of the appeal and in favor of granting the appeal and overturning the Planning and Zoning Commission's approval of this permit. Second, we'll hear from those who are neutral to the application. And third, finally, we'll hear from those who are opposed to the appeal and believe that the council should affirm the commission's decision to approve the permit and deny the appeal. Fifth order of operations is the rebuttal testimony, at which time the final questions may be asked of the applicant and the appellant. And then sixth, closing the public hearing. Lastly, council will deliberate. No new information may be provided after the hearing is closed. Questions may be directed only to staff during deliberation. Is everyone clear on the ground rules? Before we proceed any further, I'd like to ask for confirmation from each council member, please, that you have had no ex parte contact and have no conflict of interest as it pertains to this request.
Mr. Mayor, I'd just like to say I know Scott Nixon, Leanna Nixon as customers of the business, as well as Leanna's parents, Matt Kerr with the architecture, and Kathy Friedman and William Friedman as well through small business in Sandpoint. I have not had ex parte communication, and our relationships have no weight on our decision this evening, on my decision this evening.
Thank you.
No.
Right.
Mr. Mayor, I didn't get a chance to say no. Somebody did approach me to talk about this project, but I kindly reminded them that I am not able to do that at that moment. That will not affect my judgment concerning this decision. Thank you.
Very well. Okay, we will now hear from city staff who will introduce and provide initial information and an explanation regarding this matter.
Mr. Mayor, members of the council, thank you very much. For the record, Darren Fluke, interim city planner. Can you all hear me okay?
Very well.
Yeah.
Excellent. I'm going to go ahead and share my screen.
Give us a moment, Darren.
Okay.
We good? We were having some feedback. I think maybe it's resolved.
Okay. Are we, and you're seeing the screen okay?
Go. Yep, thanks. Go ahead.
Okay. So, Mr. Mayor, thank you again. You went through the order of the public hearing this evening, which is consistent with this slide. So I'm not going to go back over that slide. We're going to dive into the particulars of the application. The council will recall that this evening, the application in front of you is an appeal of a approved conditional use that was approved by the Planning and Zoning Commission. You have essentially four choices tonight in acting on this application. You can uphold or approve the appeal, which would in effect be a denial of the conditional use permit. You can deny the appeal, which conversely would approve the conditional use permit, and you may modify or add conditions of approval as you see fit, because you will be doing a de novo hearing this evening on the merits of the conditional use application itself. You can also table the appeal for additional information, or you could remand it back to the Planning and Zoning Commission for additional information and consideration. I would point out to you that the bottom two bullets there, you need to be very specific with the applicants and on the record as far as what the additional information you'd be seeking is. And then if you were to table the application, you would table that out to a date certain so that everybody at the hearing this evening knew when the next hearing would be held. So the property in question is located here. It's on the south side of Main Street, where the property fronts Main here. This is a single parcel. And then it also fronts Lincoln Avenue here. And there are three platted lots. I'll talk a bit more about the property configuration in just a moment. The total property size is 1.13 acres, and it is zoned RM, residential multifamily. Just by way of a little context on the property, in 2004, the Lincoln parcel was platted or replatted technically into three lots at Centers Edition, which are the three lots that you saw on the previous screen. In 2009, the city adopted the current comprehensive plan, and the property was designated CA2 for that parcel fronting Main Street, and then CA3 for the property fronting Main Street, and CA2 for the property fronting Lincoln. And again, I'll talk a bit more about the comprehensive land use designation in a future slide. In 2011, all of the property was rezoned RM through the citywide rezoning process that was done when the zoning code was updated subsequent to the adoption of the 2009 plan. And so that was a blanket rezone for hundreds of parcels citywide. And at that time, the property was designated for the residential multifamily. And then, of course, the subject of tonight's hearing was the December 7th decision by the Planning and Zoning Commission to approve a multifamily project for 13 dwelling units on the 1.13 acres with the attendant parking and landscaping and other features required by the code. And then in December 21st, the appeal was submitted and accepted by the applicants. the appellants rather. So as stated, the Planning and Zoning Commission heard this application on December 7th, and they did approve the application in the configuration that you see here on the slide. Basically, there are 3 separate buildings that contain the 13 dwelling units. There are 4 on the Lincoln frontage and 4 on the internal portion of the property for 8 units here. And then another 5 units that are on this north-south oriented property that has access to Main Street. Let me go back really quickly. I guess I should have pointed out to you that the Planning and Zoning Commission staff report is made a part of your record by reference, and it was included within the staff report and within the other materials that we've received. So I'm sure you've all read through that, and there may be questions on that tonight that we'll be happy to take when we get there. With regard to the comprehensive plan, I did note for you that the parcel fronting Main Street here, which is a standalone parcel currently developed with a single family dwelling, is zoned or designated context area 3, and that the parcel fronting Lincoln, which is actually 3 lots, 3 platted lots with no development on there, is designated context area 2. Council will recall that the purpose of the comprehensive plan is to provide a framework for the future development of the city. This is where the city prepares its wishes and hopes and desires for what the city is going to look like 20 years down the road. Essentially, most plans have a 20-year planning horizon. And this provides policy direction for the council and Planning and Zoning Commission as they consider development applications. The zoning ordinance, by contrast, which we're going to talk about next, I forgot I inserted this slide for you. And I know this is probably difficult to read, but this is by way of reminding the council that the comprehensive plan is much more than simply the future land use map. There are actually 13 chapters within the comprehensive plan that cover everything from community design and land use to housing, transportation, recreation, and public services and facilities, as well as economic development, natural resource and hazard areas, and special areas or sites, as well as a chapter dedicated solely to the airport. The council will recall you just heard an application relative to that. And I tell you this by way of saying that the comprehensive plan is a very high-level general picture of how the city desires itself to develop through time. But the plan is actually contains many more policies that are relevant to development beyond just the future land use map, which is only one component of the plan, which is located in Chapter 4, land use. With regard to zoning, as was noted, the property is zoned RM, which is a residential multifamily. You can see here on the map that many of the properties that were designated as context area 2 are actually zoned RM, residential multifamily. This is important for the council to note that the underlying zoning of the property creates the law that we apply when we receive a development application. One of the findings that the Planning and Zoning Commission, in this case, the City Council must make when considering a conditional use is that the application in whole complies with the provisions of the comprehensive plan. When you've got essentially a plan zone conflict like we have in this situation where the zoning does not align directly with the comprehensive plan, then it's incumbent upon the commission, and in this case the council, to make a judgment call as to whether or not the proposed application complies with other policies that are contained within the comprehensive plan, and whether the proposal really comports with the vision of the city for its future physical development. And that was the question in front of the Planning and Zoning Commission that they answered in the affirmative. With regard to the specific provisions of the zoning ordinance, the purpose of the RM zone, as you see here, is to preserve land for housing, to provide a diversity in housing options. It implements the comprehensive plan policies for those areas designated as CA3 in the 2009 comprehensive plan. The use regulations specify that 7 or fewer multifamily units are allowed by right. That is, an applicant could simply apply for a site plan review and building permit application, and we would review that application at the staff level for compliance with the provisions of the zoning ordinance, and it wouldn't be a conditional use application. By contrast, 8 or more multifamily units are allowed within this zone through the provisions of the conditional use process, which is why the Planning and Zoning Commission heard it. The applicants were proposing to combine all 4 of the underlying parcels into a single parcel and develop with 13 units, as you now know. 13 units would require 23,975 square feet and 130 feet of street frontage, which the property meets. And would require the setbacks, as you see here, 15 feet in front, rear, and on the side. You'll recall from, I don't have a slide for you on this, but you'll recall from the staff report that applying setbacks on an L-shaped parcel in this fashion becomes problematic. And I did show you how that would have been evaluated through the building permit and site plan review process. And so that's essentially how the setbacks were applied by the Planning and Zoning Commission as well. And I can, if there are questions on that, we'll bring up a better graphic for you and we can certainly talk about that in more detail. The development standards also allow for a lot coverage of 40% by the buildings and 40% by impervious surface, that is paving for parking and walkways and such, with the balance of the land dedicated to pervious surfaces. And then finally, there are additional standards that are applicable to multifamily dwellings, and they relate to the site design, landscaping, building embellishments, and architectural flourishes on the buildings, as well as the building height, which is one of the issues in front of the council tonight on appeal. It's not my job to go through the basis for the appeal. I will leave that to the appellants so that I don't misstate their position, but I will be available, obviously, to answer any questions that the commission has regarding any matters of fact or relating to the code. One of the provisions that are important for the council to consider, and that was considered by the Planning and Zoning Commission, is the height restrictions. So the base zoning designation allows for a 40-foot maximum height on any building within the zone. The buildings as proposed come in at approximately 29 feet, but there is this provision saying that to fit within the context of the neighborhood, that buildings proposed should be 1.5 stories maximum if surrounding properties are developed with single-story structures. And then you can go up to 2 stories if the surrounding structures are 2 stories in height. And I'm sure we'll talk more about this as the evening goes on. So with regard to the proposed site plan, this is Lincoln Avenue over here on the left, and this is Main Street up on the north. And what you see is an internal drive that provides access to all 13 units within the project. As I stated, the project is approvable as 2 distinct applications, one on the Main Street parcel and one on the Lincoln Street parcels. Just by way of history for the council, when that Zenner's Edition plat, which was the 3 lots that are down here fronting on Lincoln Avenue, were approved, the staff report at that time allowed those 3 lots to be created with not with frontage for each lot on the Lincoln Avenue public right-of-way, but on an easement that was created on the southern property line here. That's no longer allowed by the provisions of the zoning ordinance. And so we had advised the previous landowner that a remedy for that situation was to combine the 3 lots back into a single parcel, which would then be developable under the provisions of the RM zoning ordinance. Similarly, the Main Street parcel would be developable under those provisions as well. I did want to stress for the council that this is not a public or a private street within the project, but merely a driveway with a drive approach onto Lincoln and an approach onto Main Street that provide access to the dwellings within the project. At only 26 feet in width, that complies with the provision of the fire code, but is nowhere near wide enough to constitute a public street. And so that is merely a private drive or analogous to a drive aisle within a parking lot. The product proposed for the site is probably best shown by this aerial rendering here, with the 2 buildings that front on Lincoln here. The appellant's property located here to the north of this second 4-unit building here, and then a different style of building over here on the Main Street property. This is the north elevation is the elevation of the structure that would be facing the appellant's property. In this case, it would be this building here on the bottom left of the slide. So with regard to the zoning ordinance, the code does require that the Planning and Zoning Commission, and of course, in this case, the council, do make affirmative findings of fact on all 9 of these provisions. I'm not going to read these verbatim because we went through these, or you've been through them in some detail before, and this is detailed in the staff report in front of the Planning and Zoning Commission. But it does require that to approve a project, that affirmative findings be made on each one of these 9 provisions, and that if an application does not comply with even one of these, that denial is then the proper course of action. So again, this evening, your options are here to uphold or approve the appeal, to deny the appeal, or you could table or even remand back to the Planning and Zoning Commission. Here, I should note for you that remanding the decision or remanding back to the Planning and Zoning Commission would then again create an appealable decision based on whatever decision the Planning and Zoning Commission makes. That would be appealable back up to the council. And so were you to take that course of action, we may be back here doing this same thing again on a different or similar decision by the Planning and Zoning Commission. So that's all I had for you slide-wise, and I am happy to take any questions that the council may have at this time.
Mr. Mayor?
Yeah.
Darren, if you don't mind, on the last slide with the 9 points. It's minor. I just want to know, is there a reason why 2, 3, 4, and 6 are highlighted?
Commissioner, thank you. I'm sorry, let me back up. Mr. Mayor, council member, thank you for pointing that out. And that is my mistake. That was, this slide was prepared on another application, and I neglected to take the highlighting off of those provisions. So please ignore the fact that some of those are bolded.
Thank you.
Darren, I have a question for you. If you can go back to the site plan image. And I believe I heard you say that if this project were proposed as 2 separate projects, one 8-unit and one 5-unit, that those would be approvable without a CUP?
Mr. Mayor, that's correct. The zoning ordinance only requires a conditional use permit for projects that include 8 or more dwelling units in a multifamily project. I should have mentioned previously, and I'll take the opportunity now to tell you that at the staff level, we encourage the applicant to combine the parcels in the fashion that they did when they obtained the Main Street parcel. because we felt it benefited the project and made for a better project by having two approaches, one to Main and one to Lincoln, which distributes the trips a little more evenly coming out of the project and doesn't burden any one street within the city with the additional traffic generated by the proposed dwelling units. And so we did recommend that they do this, that they lay the project out in this way, because we felt it was a better project than doing two separate projects that wouldn't go through the conditional use process.
Okay, I just want to underscore that point. I think that's really significant that the applicant could have just produced two separate projects here without going through this process, and they wouldn't be before either this body or the Planning and Zoning Commission. And here they're going through two public hearings because of a staff recommendation. And believe me, I'm not throwing staff under the bus here. I think those are good recommendations, but I just think it's really relevant here that the applicant could have simply continue with this project, so seeking a building permit, site permit, and continue with this project without going through the CUP process.
Mr. Mayor, thank you for that. And I think no offense taken. We really were trying to get the best possible project for the city. And at this point, I probably should have made this a slide for you. But I just wanted to note that this is how the properties are configured today. And this is how we would have viewed the setbacks were we reviewing two separate projects. Obviously, as a single project, it makes the notion of a front, a side, and a rear somewhat obsolete. And so we did, the best we could, essentially, with what we were dealing with. And what you see on the screen there is what we would have been dealing with two separate projects.
So, and please leave that up there. So, had the applicant just gone forward and created two projects, that there would actually be less of a setback for both, less of a setback between the appellant's property and the project property, the applicant property.
Mr. Mayor, somewhat. So this side setback that you note here on the which is the north property line on the Lincoln Street frontage, a side setback would be 5 feet in this case, which is what was proposed by the applicants originally. The Planning and Zoning Commission were concerned about the proximity of that building in this location to the appellant's property, and they therefore required that the second story of a structure built here be a minimum of 15 feet off this property line, which would be the equivalent of a rear setback.
And as far as the orange parcel?
The orange parcel is basically laid out in a fashion similar to what you probably would have seen were it to come in as a standalone project as well. The building runs along this side of the property with the drive aisle here. Obviously, were you doing it as a standalone project, that could be flipped, or you could do other configurations, but you could, in theory, have a building 5 feet off this property line here.
But as it stands, the building is set back how far?
Well, the 26-foot drive aisle plus 5 feet, so 31 feet to the face of the structure.
Okay. And of course, I imagine it's 5 feet on the, what would that be, the east side?
Mr. Mayor, that's correct. 5 feet off this property line.
Thank you. Any other questions?
I have a question. Darren, could you explain to me, in the P&Z hearing, it was mentioned that it's a double frontage lot. Could you talk about that? Is it?
Mr. Mayor, council member, we would not consider this to be a double frontage lot in the classic sense. Essentially, a double frontage lot is where a single lot has frontage on two roads. And in those situations, I mean, that's to be discouraged. It's actually not allowed by the code. And what you do in those situations is restrict access to the second public right of way. Maybe I can let me bring up a the GIS map so I can show you something more telling. Are you seeing the GIS there? Okay.
Yes.
Let me just take you to another part of the city where we saw a recent application. And that was up here on North Boyer. And so we saw a recent application on this property right here. Computer's going kind of slow, but essentially the application was to bring a road up the middle and then double front that road with lots here and lots here. So technically the lots all along here would be double fronted because their rear lot line would be on Boyer. And then their front lot line would be on a new local street to be completed by the applicant. And so what you don't want is for a given lot, and these lots are actually a good example of it right here. What you don't want is for a lot to have access both here on the local and both here on the arterial. And so in cases like this, what we typically do is require that there be no access to these lots off the arterial roadway or collector roadway. In this case, because it was a multifamily project, we viewed this as, and how the code would view it is two separate approaches, one to Main Street and one to Lincoln Avenue over here, that would provide access not to a single lot, but to all of the 13 dwellings within the project. And I wanted to show you a similar product here, which is at the southeast corner of Division and Main Street, which is very similar to the configuration proposed here. A private driveway that wraps in and provides access to all the dwelling units in off two separate streets.
Mr. Mayor, Darren. So you stole my thunder a little bit with Darren. That was what I was going to ask you to bring up, because I was trying to find in our city maybe a comparable footprint of an access versus a road, so we can get better clarification. And that to me looks very similar to what is proposed in this development. So thank you for bringing that up.
Mr. Mayor, council member, you also may recall you reviewed a year ago the ridge at Cedar, which also has a similar configuration with two separate roads that have two separate drive approaches, providing access to a number of dwelling units.
Mayor, Darren, if you can go back to that slide with you said you were going to leave up for a while with showed the front, the side. Yeah, that one. Just out of curiosity, how did you get the sides and the rear and the front? Like, why wouldn't the front side be the front where the cars are parked? Just so I can understand better.
Mr. Mayor, council member, the frontage is defined as the property line that abuts the road frontage or the public right of way. And so for the southern parcel that is on Lincoln Avenue, the rear property line is then defined as the opposite of the front, or the one most distant from the right of way. And then the sides are what's left.
Just wanted to make sure. And I have another question, please. If these would have been done two separate applications, and let's say the context area two, could the appellant's property, could they have appealed on that individually?
Mr. Mayor, council member, any decision made by staff is appealable up through the Planning and Zoning Commission and then ultimately to the council. But in the case of a site plan review, the answer is no. We would not be reviewing the comprehensive plan. We would simply be reviewing for compliance with the provisions of the zoning ordinance.
So in theory, we still could be here even if they did two different applications. Am I understanding that correctly?
Mr. Mayor, council member, yes, you are.
Just want to make sure. Thank you.
Darren, another question for you. As far as neighboring properties can you describe the building heights, at least in terms of stories of the neighboring properties, not just the appellant's properties, but all the properties around the applicant property?
Mr. Mayor, this structure to the south is a two-story structure. And then there are single-story structures on the appellant's property, this property to the north, and the property to the east.
Okay, thank you.
Mr. Mayor, I have an interesting question. So Darren, in cul-de-sacs, I mean, and I know there was concern about this driveway. So would it be about the same length as a cul-de-sac if it were that kind of development? That it's not going to be any bigger than a cul-de-sac road or anything out of the ordinary? That makes sense?
Mr. Mayor, council member, let me take a shot at that, and you can let me know if I answer the question. Were it to be a cul-de-sac, that would be a public street, is what you're describing. And so the right of way for a public street is 60 feet rather than the 26 being shown for this drive aisle. Within that 60 feet of right of way, you would get curb, gutter, and sidewalk, in addition to a street section that allows for on-street parking on both sides of the street. And so a public street would end up being a much larger facility than what the private drive is being shown. Does that get at your question?
It does indeed. Thank you.
Mayor?
Yeah.
Darren, can you speak to the maximum height for residential multifamily? What is that? Can you just clarify that for the public, please?
Mr. Mayor, council member, the maximum height within this zoning designation is 40 feet.
Okay, and how many typical stories would that be?
Mr. Mayor, council member, that would be 3 stories.
Thank you.
Council, any other questions?
Not at this time.
All right. Next, we will hear a presentation from the applicant. If you'd like to please come to the podium.
Good evening.
Thank you.
Thanks for this opportunity to move the project forward.
So I'm Kathy Friedman. This is my husband, William Friedman. This is Matt Kerr from SOK Architecture. I just want to take a minute to kind of introduce ourselves. We've been in the community for over 2 decades, been business owners just as long. I have a unique experience in being a business owner and a resident that I am constantly in contact with the public. So I know what's going on with housing and difficulty finding rentals, that kind of stuff. So when I hear this on a daily basis, I want to do something about it. I had a really unique opportunity where somebody came to me and I could do something about it. So that's kind of where this project launched, was to be able to address the needs of the town of Sandpoint. So you're gonna, I think, jump into more specifics.
Yeah, thanks, Kathy. Well, again, we're really excited for this day because it's an opportunity to move this project forward. You know, really, the true opportunity is providing much needed housing to the community. And I'm certain that you would all agree that the community certainly needs more housing. You know, joining us tonight is not just Matt Kerr of SOK, but also Stephen Snedden of Snedden Law. We'll be hearing from him as well in a few minutes. You know, in my experience, most development projects, excuse me, represent change, and change can be difficult for some. For sure, I've been there, especially when they occur near our home, right? Change in development impacts and activities are often unwanted, for sure. And we recognize these concerns. As such, we have put forth a significant effort to address these concerns as best we could. The project has been both challenging and uniquely rewarding for us. And a huge thanks to our entire team, our architects, surveyors, engineers, construction team, as well as the community experts in Sandpoint who spent countless hours to help create this quality housing project. I'd especially like to thank the incredible efforts of the Sandpoint City staff, Darren, Amanda, and the rest of you. I won't mention everybody, but they certainly guided us through this process by working closely with our entire team at every turn. We started the opportunity to potentially add 21 units to the much needed pool of available housing in Sandpoint, which quickly changed from 21 to 18. And finally, we were where we are today at today's proposed development scaled back all the way to 13 units. This now has become really a purpose for us, a purpose to go beyond what we thought was possible and to serve an important role in carefully moving our cherished community forward into tomorrow. That, by the way, seems to have arrived a little early for some of us, but nonetheless is surely here. Our team, in preparation for design considerations, has spent significant time getting to know the neighborhood. We not only reduced the total number of units, but we also changed the width of the access and the garage layouts to accommodate emergency response considerations as well as traffic flow. We're pleased to have provided a very good design solution for this legal but difficult land situation. And to help bring this into focus, picture in your minds, most of us have been around Sandpoint for a long time. So picture in your minds as you would look around Sandpoint. We see many once small, older single-family homes that have been updated and expanded, or often even replaced with larger homes to accommodate property owners' needs. One has to simply drive around the city to see these changes everywhere. As this will certainly continue to happen in our future, we feel our project fits well into the natural expansion of these improvements, providing much needed housing. I also think it's important to note that any home in this neighborhood, per current code, which has been discussed here, could decide to build a 2-story, 40-foot in height structure as indicated by what we see in this area. And I'm going to go into that a little further here in a second. While considering design factors for our project, we took into account the impact height would have been on neighboring properties, which is reflected in our design of a 29-foot at roof peak height. So Amanda, if you don't mind, thank you. So you'll see that we zoomed out to consider not just the properties immediately surrounding this project, but to consider a larger definition. And Amanda, you can just scroll through those every couple seconds, and I'll show you on a map where these are located in just a second. So we zoomed out to consider a larger definition of the neighborhood, understanding that the zoning for this property and the surrounding properties throughout this area is residential multifamily. You'll see many 2-story homes and several multifamily units located near this project. And get to the map. And some of these projects are 6 lots away, 8 lots away, around the corner. And again, the map is coming up in just a second where I've identified these are all 2-story structures. You can see in red where the property development is. And then the orange are multifamily that are just past division on Main Street itself. So with that, I think at this point, I'd like to bring in Matt to share his views on the layout of the property and the buildings and answer any questions you guys might have. Thanks, Matt. You bet. I'm going to leave this here for a second.
Good evening, council members. Amanda, if I could have that first slide of our site plan. I think at this point, that's the most relevant image to be discussed. This is a 13 building townhome proposition. They are 2-story townhomes, individually owned. They have carports instead of garages. In working with city staff for emergency access, you can't pass through a garage. So the carport was an acceptable compromise. So those are open on the ground floor carports, and the residence is located behind those structures. On this image, we see the setbacks as defined. Darren laid those out for us. The patios are extending it behind it, but that is permissible to have the patios in those setback areas. We talked about reducing the overall number of units. We started with 21, and that was absolutely packing this lot. Once we started working with staff and we looked at lot coverage, we reduced that number, and then with the 26-foot driveway, this was the best solution for, getting emergency vehicles in and out of the property, proper access. So if, Amanda, if we could skip to image 9, these are renderings of the project, just to give you some idea of scale. Next. This is looking from the Main Street into the project. You can see the appellant's property there on the right. Next. We're moving further down Main, looking into their lot, and then you can see our project behind. Next. We've moved over to Lincoln now and looking at the north side of the east-west L, if you will, of the property. Next. We added a small skirt roof over the patios to help break down the scale. Looking over the fence, current fence. Next. Here again, we're still on Lincoln, looking into the property. There you can see the carports. And next. At this point, we're looking down the 26-foot drive aisle. I apologize, the computer did not want to cooperate and show the concrete approach apron for our driveway. That will be in future renderings. Next. We're moving down our drive aisle, looking into the carports and the townhomes. Next. Again, we're just moving a little bit further down the drive aisle. Next. Here we're at the turn, looking north. You can see how we've projected some volumes, held it back and others just to give articulation and try and break down the scale a little bit. Next. We've just turned a little bit, looking kind of down both sides of the drive aisle. Next. Rising up just a bit to give you some perspective as far as roof lines, etc. Next. A similar view, just with a little bit of perspective. Next. And then, yeah, hovering over Lincoln, kind of looking back at the entire project. Next. And then this is straight down, looking at the project. I think the colors and shadows really kind of help you understand the proportions and size of the buildings. At that time, that completes the architecture portion of the presentation, and I'll turn it back over to William. Thank you.
Actually, while you're there, can I ask a question, please? And
Absolutely.
Amanda, if you go back to that site plan, the beginning, thank you. Mr. Kerr, it looks like, can you tell me again what the setbacks are on the townhouses to the west? The setbacks from the appellant's property?
It would be 5 feet setback.
Because it appears to look like over 6, it says 6 feet, but it actually looks like it's beyond 6 feet. Oh, I guess that's to the roof line.
Oh, yes, I apologize. Yeah, the setback is 5 feet, but we've slid the building a little bit further away. So the roof line is 6 feet.
6 feet.
Yes.
Yeah, that's what it says here.
And
And
the
then
building
it's
is 8
looks
feet.
like 15 feet and even 17. Well, I'm a little confused. It says 15 feet, 2 inches.
For the roof line,
I see, to the roof line, and then 17 feet, 2 inches to the building face.
correct.
Okay, thank you.
Yes.
And not to give you guys more to think about in this, but we put a lot of work into what I'm about to share with you. And so we would really love it if you would consider allowing us to have the flexibility to move buildings 1 and 2 which is number 2 is in front of the appellate's property, to move it 10 feet further away from that property line. We'd like that to be an option.
Wouldn't that impact the drive lane there?
No,
Uh,
not with our plan, without going
Oh,
into
so
more
you-
detail. Yeah,
And so you're saying you change the architecture of the buildings to accomplish that?
that's one of the option.
Okay.
There's another option, which is acquiring property further south that would enable us to move the road 10 feet.
Huh. Thank you.
Yeah, you're welcome. Thank you. And Mr. Snedden.
Good evening, Mayor and council members. My name is Steven Snedden. I'm an attorney in Sandpoint, and I'm here on behalf of the applicant. There's an age-old adage in presentations to save the best for last. And it's unfortunate then that on the final part of our presentation, you have before you a lawyer to talk about the standards for this development. That is probably evidence that we didn't save the best for last, but I ask you don't hold it against my clients. You see, I simply couldn't resist the opportunity to recite a bunch of legal jargon before you today. There are 2 important pieces to this application that I want to cover: the comp plan and the standards for a CUP. I was heavily involved in the 2009 comp plan. At the time, I appreciated the aspects in the comp plan that moved Sandpoint towards more diverse housing stock, infill on existing properties, more flexibility in lot sizes, and more affordable housing. I was delighted to see that in your recent update to the comp plan, you took these elements and moved them even farther as goals for the city of Sandpoint. It is clear from market conditions today that we need that type of thinking. The subject property is located within context areas 2 and 3, and I thought your staff did a really nice job of summarizing the goals within those areas in their staff report. Within those context areas for this subject property, we are striving for housing that is an efficient use of land. That's goal LU-1. The massing here of the structures is certainly an efficient use of land while preserving green space on the site. We are also striving for traditional neighborhood development, goal LU2, with a variety of housing, goal H1, and a blend of mixed densities in neighborhoods. That's also goal H1. Attached single-family homes achieves both of these goals. This is a blend. It is right in between traditional standalone residential and more intense multifamily structures. I point out these policies you have adopted to show that when the city solicited input from residents as to what they wanted within the city, and when city staff and city council stepped back to look at how the city should develop, it's this type of project that we are talking about, a blend of efficient new housing within our neighborhoods. That's the direction in the comp plan. But the comp plan is a guidance document, and a CUP is judged by specific standards. So now it's time for me to dive into the legal requirements. The tendency when we are looking at a development is to look at whether you want the development or not. That's how the public approaches these types of decisions, but that's not the requirement in Idaho code. In fact, what we're looking at is whether the development meets your specific standards of the Sandpoint City Code. And if it does, then it should be approved. This approach, this systematic, formulaic approach, is for the protection of private property rights, so that an applicant comes in and is judged the same way that other applicants are judged. You have already adopted the standards for this project. You adopted these standards by your code, and I want to make sure that we show you this project meets the standards of Title IX, Chapter 9. The first question proposed by your standards is to verify that the proposed use is allowed within a CUP zone. Here it clearly is. In fact, the proposed use is something that is allowed by right with the exception of the configuration of the buildings. So I think the staff showed you that the applicant could file a building permit tomorrow for the same number of units on these properties, and if they did so, it'd be granted without a hearing. The only difference is in the configuration, well, the assemblage of the lots. We would prefer more green space and to group some of the buildings together. To achieve this goal, we have jumped through all of the hoops of the entire CUP process. The second and third standards look at whether the development will be harmonious with the neighborhood and in line with the goals of the comp plan. William did a good job explaining to you the characteristics of the neighborhood. And I would point out as a general observation that people actually like density, in my opinion, as long as it is done right. I say that based on South Sandpoint, which is extremely dense with a lot of zero lot line setbacks for the buildings and smaller lots. South Sandpoint continues to be one of the most desirable neighborhoods in the city. And the fourth standard asks whether the project will be hazardous or disturbing to existing uses. You have already made a policy decision in that area about almost all aspects of this development. The setbacks on the buildings are permitted by right. The number of units is permitted by right. So if you have already decided that this project complies and that it is not a disturbance to the neighborhood. The fifth standard looks at services, whether there is adequate utilities, highways, streets, emergency protections, and certainly there is. The sixth looks at cost to public services. And there is no more cost than what could be developed anyway on this site. So the burden is not additional. And in fact, I believe that there are several studies that show servicing density is actually more cost efficient than single family homes, at least in terms of sewer and water. Single family homes are some of the most expensive to serve in terms of sewer and water services. The seventh standard asks whether the uses on the property will be injurious, more noise, more smoke, more fumes. Certainly these homes, residential uses are not more injurious. And will the vehicular approaches to the property designed so as not to create an interference? I think the staff pointed out that through traffic with 2 connections to local streets is better than most of the developments that we have. And finally, then as to the last standard that you have in your city code, that it does not result in the destruction, loss, damage of a natural, scenic, or historic feature of major importance, and it does not. And from this recital, I hope it is evident that this project meets all of the milestones that you have asked of someone who wants to build within your city. And that's not only my conclusion, but it's also the conclusion of your city staff. It's not by accident. When we started out, we wanted something dramatically different than what's in front of you, but we've adjusted the designs and the units to comply with city code. In this city, we face a crisis. It is a crisis of housing, where people are struggling to find a place and live in an area that they love. The project proposes to add units to an existing site within the city for the benefit of our residents and families. And for this reason, we ask that you approve the project. I also want to add one more clarification as to what William just stated. Within the original approval by the Planning and Zoning Commission, the Planning and Zoning Commission approved the project with an added condition of approval that they formulated during the hearing process. And the added condition of approval was to set back that second story. It sounds like everyone has looked through that and is kind of familiar with that subject. I think what William was asking you here earlier is that there are many, many reasons why we do not want to have a setback on the second floor. It just requires us to completely rework the entire project. And I think it really should be viewed as a penalty on this project because it is more than what would be required if someone were just to pull a building permit there tomorrow. But if you find it absolutely necessary to impose that condition on us, then we ask that you do so with the flexibility for us to move that building back slightly without going back again through the CUP process. Because if we have to do that, then we're going to need to rework things in a fairly dramatic way at considerable expense and cost. And so, we want some flexibility to try and avoid going through that again. So thank you very much. We're happy to answer any questions.
Mr. Mayor? Yeah. I just want to make sure I'm understanding correctly what I heard. Stephen, thank you for that. What I'm hearing asking is we take away that setback, have a normal 2-story, but allow you to move it back or 10 feet. Is that correct? Yeah. So remove the setback requirement and you'll move it.
Oh, not quite. So
Thank you.
We just want the normal setback, the 5 foot that applies to every other building in this zone. And that's the way the presentation was proposed to you here tonight and shown. In fact, I think Matt showed you that the setback of the building is actually slightly more than the 5 foot. I guess what we're asking for is that if you decide that we need to set back that second story,
Mhm.
that you give us the option to move the building back instead of maybe just adjusting the second story. Adjusting the second story really is difficult for our configuration. And so that's the request for you.
I apologize if I wasn't clear, but that's exactly what I was asking. Thank you.
Then my mistake.
No, no.
Thanks.
And to be clear, that would be accomplished by purchasing the property to the south, and then the drive lane and everything would move further to the, I'm sorry, not the south, it's the west, would be moved as well. Is that correct?
Would be the south.
You're correct.
Sorry.
How probable is that?
We already have a written agreement.
But
So.
Ex- but extremely difficult, right? It's acquiring a portion of another piece of property. And, one of the aspects that we run into here is the width of the right of way, which really limits what we can do. And so that's part of what makes this necessary. Is it the 26 feet? Is that right? The 26-foot width there means that we can't, that we just don't have much flexibility. And so, if you impose a requirement like setting back the second floor, it probably means that we have to go to the adjacent property owner, negotiate to purchase a piece of their property, try and combine that into the parcels, and then move some of the buildings back because the setback second floor just doesn't work with the structures.
I have a question, Mr. Mayor.
Yep.
Are these for sale or for rent?
For rent.
Okay, thank you.
Mr. Mayor.
Yep.
So we're talking a lot about moving buildings and stories and everything, but to me, this is very vague. Nobody's using footage to tell me exactly what you're doing. So if this is something that the council is going to consider, I think we need to have that information. You're moving the building how many feet to get what if we're going to discuss these type of conditions? We actually have to know specifics.
Yeah.
Whether we choose to do anything or not is another issue.
You bet. And we
But-
do have
We have
a site plan that we can share with you that shows that.
Off of that north property line.
So can somebody speak clearly to exactly what you're asking for and in what direction buildings are going to move and what setbacks will become? So we can understand more specifically what we need to discuss.
Sure, what we're asking for is well, we'd like it to be approved as we have shared it tonight. But we'd also like to throw in there that if there's a setback requirement for the second story, then we would like the option for you to allow us to move building 1 and building 2, which are the ones on the front Lincoln, back 10 feet, which would be a total of 18-foot clearance from the existing property line of the appellant, and a little bit more for building number 1, which is to the west of their property. Does that make sense?
That makes it much more clear.
Good. Good.
Mr. Mayor, so just going back to this point that you're saying, so building 1, building 2 drop back further setback than what they are. Building 2 has got a 5-foot setback from the appellant's house as it
Correct.
is, 6. And then in the conditions on planning and zoning, they wanted a step back, correct? One story, if you're going to keep the 5-foot step or setback, then your building would start at 1 story, right? And then how many, what's the
10 feet.
10 feet before it goes up to story 2
Correct.
right now. So the renderings, Mr. Kerr, that you've showed us tonight are those renderings that have the planning and zoning's conditions on this. Okay, so these are the original renderings
That's right.
as you guys have designed them.
That's
Okay.
right.
Any other questions for the applicant?
I guess I got a question for legal. If that is not, sorry, not Stephen, but our legal Fonda. If that is something that we discussed and felt necessary to remove something that P and Z had done, are we capable to do that tonight?
You may amend that condition tonight
Mhm.
on a de novo review. However, I will advise council that the applicants did not appeal that condition. They did not file a cross appeal on that condition. We just happened to be here on a de novo review. As a point of clarification, also for the record, we've continued to talk tonight that a CUP would not have been needed had they done this in 2 projects. But Sandpoint City Code 9-4-2-3 says 8 units or more does require a CUP. So those southern 8 would need to be 7 for there not to have been needed a CUP. I just want to make sure the record's really clear.
Thank you for catching that. I appreciate that.
And could I respond to that aspect? You know, when the decision from planning and zoning came out, it really surprised us and we struggled with what to do with that. And by the time, you know, and that is part of the reason that we started approaching the other property owner is to try and figure out additional options at that time. Then there was the review and we clarified with city staff and at the time that it's a de novo review. So it's a new hearing. And based on that, we didn't feel the need to go ahead and file a cross appeal and kind of needlessly burden the record. So that's why we didn't file that. But the condition of approval that they imposed is onerous. And we'd ask that you remove it tonight.
Any other questions? Thank you.
All right,
Appreciate that.
thanks.
Next will be the appellant's presentation. If you'd please come to the podium.
Good evening, Mr. Mayor, council members. Thank you for the opportunity to be here today. My name is Brent Featherston. I'm a principal at Featherston Law Firm at 113 South 2nd here in Sandpoint, a law firm that's been here about 50 years now. And I represent the Nixons, the appellants. Scott and Leanna Nixon are seated first and second row. On my right, your left. There's some interesting information as I sit back and watch this presentation. Some of it's brand new to us tonight. I want to start by suggesting, as I hear this idea for the first time being proposed by the applicants of acquiring more property, that one of the possible outcomes that your staff planner has suggested is remanding this matter back to the commission for findings based on more information as to whether or not the applicants are going to acquire an additional 10 feet to the south and can then meet those setbacks. That's a key part of this appeal. So I'll just leave that there since that's where their presentation ended. I don't want to lose that in the mix of my part of tonight's presentation, that it may be something that needs to be fleshed out, shall we say, by some additional information. If in fact, as Mr. and Mr. Friedman indicate, there is a purchase and sale agreement, that may alleviate some of the objections that the Nixons have and may alleviate the need for additional proceedings. But I don't know that. I'm learning that in the last 15 minutes. So I would suggest that is a possibility. As I indicated, the Nixons are my clients here. If I could try to do this, I'm not the best at these technology things, but I'll do my best. Their property is going to be reflected in, I think, this screen, which I think you may have already seen in another slide, is highlighted there, surrounded on two, really a little bit of a third side by the project. I would have to say they bear the brunt of whatever this council decides and whatever is the final outcome. And when I say this, and as a preface to my comments, it is actually very nice to see that the Friedmans, who I don't know, are represented by very good, capable representation. Mr. Kerr, who I've known for a number of years, Mr. Snedden, who I've known even longer. These are good people who are speaking on behalf of their client and representing the project in a good manner. There are some things that I think you'll hear from Mr. and Mrs. Nixon about their concerns about how this was initially presented last year. They may or may not reflect on the overall decision that you make as a council, but I think it simply goes into why we're here, and I think you should know that. Mr. Friedman made the comment that nobody likes change. That's true, but we all accept that that is going to be the case. This isn't really about stopping change. I want to be clear. The Nixons aren't saying don't use that land, don't develop that land. We all know that's nice when a neighboring property isn't developed and we have the benefit of whatever buffer it provides us, but that's not reality. And these are realistic people, the Nixons are. What this is really about is how it's developed. If I were to use an analogy, well, let me start by saying we've talked about this, and my clients and I think we agree that this is a very nice presentation and a nice project, but probably not for that particular piece of property. If you will, the analogy I was going to use is it's like trying to shoehorn a size 10 foot into a size 6 shoe, perhaps. There's just not enough space for what's being projected. All of that may change. Some of that may change with the addition of additional property to the south that will allow for those additional setbacks. It was discussed, the conditions that were imposed at the commission hearing was discussed a few moments ago. I would echo the thought that there was not a cross appeal filed. I understand Mr. Snedden's point that they did not feel that that was required. However, I think that a court would see that differently. I think that a court would say on review, if you haven't appealed a particular condition under the city's ordinances, you are probably bound by that condition. And so that condition of 5 feet at the ground level, 10 feet, additional 10 feet at the second story is a condition that the applicant chose not to appeal. And at this point, I think is binding on the applicant. So it leaves, unfortunately for the council, it leaves you with a circumstance that's sort of an all or nothing or a remand, perhaps, to the commission decision. The property is also adjacent to the 3 lots. I want to show those 3 lots. The property that the applicants are proposing is this property here. It appears that Mr. Zener in 2004 subdivided or replatted a single lot into 3 lots that 2 of which abut the Nixon property to its south boundary. I'm not sure you're going to see this real well. Let me see if I can zoom this in a little bit. The concern that is demonstrated when we look at the Zener replat is that lots 3 and a portion of lot 2 of the applicant's property, when it was surveyed in 2004 and platted, indicated that the backyard fence of the appellants, the Nixons property, encroached about 6 feet, 5.8 feet into, and I've inserted a comment box there for you to see that. That fence, we believe to be still the same fence. We've not been able to find pins. There's about 2 feet of snow, so that's a little difficult at this point in time to find any pins on the ground adjacent to that back corner of the Nixon property's fence. That would be the southeast corner of the Nixon property. However, as I'm sure the city's council attorney can advise, that fence creates a potential clear title issue for the applicant. If in fact that is where the pin is today, if the fence is as it was presented or depicted in the survey in 2004 still today, the Nixons likely have acquired that property, that 5.8 feet, by adverse possession over a period of nearly 20 years now, or more than 20 years since the fence was in existence in 2004. That creates an issue for meeting the setback requirement that the applicant is attempting to propose to you, which is another 5 feet from, well, I should say a 5 feet setback from the actual boundary line. The boundary line, at least as projected on screen here, is actually inside the backyard of the Nixon property, or it was as of that survey. That is an issue that will come to bear on whether the applicant can in fact convey that. Oh, there we, thank you. Like I said, my technology abilities are not great. So the issue here, I think, is two or threefold here. One is the setback issue we've talked about. One is whether or not the applicant can meet that setback within the now constricted area that appears to have been created by the longstanding fence encroachment. A third one that what I want to touch on is been touched on by the applicant's presentation, which is the scaling of this property or this project in relationship to adjacent properties. So let me take them kind of one at a time. The scaling issue is perhaps where we should start. The applicant has presented you with a number of photos as well as a map showing where particular, let me see if I can get this to share, showing where particular adjacent properties or neighborhood properties are that are two-story. I guess I would point out to the council that, however, the statute as written, the ordinance as written, directs you at 9-4-2-3H6A to scale the project to the overall height that relates to that of adjacent structures. Okay, so it's not every structure within the neighborhood, or even every structure within a certain radius. It's, according to this the plain reading of this ordinance, it is in fact adjacent structures. And the applicant has pointed out to you that the Nixon home and the other home in the corner of Main and Lincoln are in fact single-story structures. At the commission hearing, there was much confusion presented about the Nice home, which is immediately to the east on Main Street, immediately east of the project. This is the Nice residence. You have a declaration from the owner saying this is not a two-story structure. There is no upper story that is finished. It is an unfinished attic. That is a visual of that building.
And to be clear, this is the building that you're saying was suggested as a two-story building in the presentation.
I think they referred to it as a story and a half in the commission presentation before the commission, Planning and Zoning Commission. But there was definitely some confusion as to whether it was a story and a half or 2 stories. I'm just simply clearing up the record on that. That is neither of those creatures. It is neither a 2-story nor is it a story and a half. And Mr. Nice has provided us that evidence. Which leaves us, I think, with only one other structure that's adjacent. And if I can find the right image, I'm going to share that with you. Bear with me for a moment. And I think this is the one here. On the Lincoln Street frontage. The home just to the south of the project, which would have been to the south of lots, I think, 1, 2, and 3 of the original Zener plat. You see a structure in pink on the right of the boundary line. Again, I think we could, the council, I suppose, could conjecture that that is a 2-story building based upon windows in the upper gable end of that. I would suggest to you that that certainly is not definitive, but is it a story and a half, or is it 2-story? It does not bear resemblance to the architectural rendering of a full 2-story structure that we see from the applicant, and that is also on the exhibit on screen at this moment. So the two are not scaled appropriately to each other. Furthermore, the city's ordinance is fairly clear that at 9464 sub A, that the RM zone defines and depicts a 2-story structure and 30 feet or lower, whichever is lower. This particular issue of scaling, I think you need to confine your analysis to what is adjacent to the project, not what is in the neighborhood. Because quite frankly, as I think the applicant, Mr. Friedman, presented to you, the nearest similar structure is at the southeast corner. That may have been city planner that presented this, Mr. Fluke, is at the corner of Division and Main, about a half a mile away, I believe, up Main Street, east of this particular project. The reason I think that the council needs to constrain itself to analyzing those structures immediately adjacent is, number one, your ordinance says that. It doesn't say within a zone, within a neighborhood, within a block, so many block radius. It says adjacent properties. And then number two, if you are trying to follow the ordinance or the concept of the ordinance of scaling appropriately, where are you going to draw the line? I mean, one of the things that I'm here to try to hopefully remind the council, and I'm sure your legal counsel will do this as well, is that at some point it becomes an arbitrary decision-making process if we're simply drawing lines based upon where we can find a similarly designed or similarly scaled structure. I'm suggesting to you, your ordinance is very clear. You don't need to do that. Engaging in that process would simply be engaging in an arbitrary decision-making process, which of course I don't think you want to do. So that is, I think, the scaling issue. The setback requirements. There's been much discussion about what is or is not the appropriate setback here. If we were to go, if I'm to go back and have you look at the drawing that shows, or the map rather, that shows the property that is the appellant's property, excuse me. There is really no question when you look at Mr. and Mrs. Nixon's property, what is the front and what is the rear yard. Your ordinances appear to make a fairly clear attempt to define what is a front and rear yard for setback purposes. And it is fairly easy to apply that to the Nixon property. The same is actually true for the parcels as currently configured. The only reason we're now here before you on a different interpretation of those setbacks and applying the 5-foot setback to the adjoining line to the Nixon property is because they're proposing to combine these lots or reconfigure these lots in a way that suits the applicant's project. That and the fact that the project does not front on a public street, and the applicant is proposing a private drive through the project, through both lots or all 4 lots, which will, I guess, be combined into 1 lot. And because the city's ordinance, I guess, this is the reasoning, because the city's ordinance requires setbacks to be defined by what is frontage on a public street. The applicant is not proposing to make a public street through the project. Because there's no public street, we can reconfigure the front, side, and rear yard setbacks according to this interpretation. Without that, none of this happens. But I would just urge the council to apply common sense and logic. When you look at the Nixon property, is there any question what is the rear yard and the rear yard setback? Equally, when you look at the applicant's project and take out the equation of combining the lots, take out the equation that the through road is a private drive, is there any question that each of those residences, each of those structures with the townhomes, that the backyard is the backyard, the yard that fronts to or butts up to the Nixon property? Those are backyards. Those are rear yards and should be subject to the rear yard setback. I think as we look at this issue, as you look at this issue and you make a decision, I don't envy the council in this setting. I looked at the narrative of the applicant. I heard words, I saw words that say we have a desperate housing situation. I saw words, phrases of critical housing situation. There's probably no disagreement about that. This isn't about, though, making a decision based on desperation or critical need. It's making a decision that is consistent with the scaling of adjacent properties. It's making a decision based upon what is consistent with the setback requirements as they are usually applied in circumstances with these lot configurations. It is also, I believe, respectfully, a matter of making a decision that is based on what you want your community to look like over the coming years. There are many, probably many, certainly some other sites to which this particular type of project, 2 full stories, minimum setbacks, could be placed. Alternatively, a different type of project could be placed on this property, perhaps not as dense, certainly not as tall and imposing on the neighborhood, and certainly not as impactful on the Nixons and other adjacent landowners. And if that were the project that was being proposed, we probably wouldn't be here because the Nixons would not be objecting to it. But that's not what's being proposed. So I urge you to not be caught up, which I'm sure you're not, into a desperation or critical decision-making process based on the applicant's narrative. When we do that, we all know we make mistakes as individuals when we make decisions out of desperation or urgency. We need to be thoughtful here. I'm sure this council will be very thoughtful in its deliberations. The notion again of setbacks, 2-staged setbacks from the commission, I don't think that's up for appeal before you. If there is some interest in the council of addressing that issue together with acquiring more property to the south and moving the project further to the south, then I would urge you to take the option that Mr. Fluke offered of remanding this back to your commission for findings. Things like evidence like what is the offer, what property is being purchased, is it a firm offer in writing enforceable, that sort of thing. It would be, I believe, inappropriate for the council to accept that as a pie in the sky, as a possibility, as the applicant is suggesting to you, when we don't have enough information today to know if it's actually a reality. if it's a reality, it may well resolve some or all of the issues that the appellants have. And I thank you for your time. If you have any questions, I'll be happy to stand for them.
Mr. Featherston, I have a question. If you, and I know you're not in control, or maybe you are in control, but if you can, maybe it's you, Amanda, go back to that original slide where you were showing the adjacent properties, and you had the one building that borders to the south, adjacent to the south.
Oh, sure.
It has upper story windows that appear to be in the attic.
Okay.
So that's on Main Street. It's adjacent to the property bordering on the southern border.
I believe this is the one you're asking for, Mr. Mayor.
Yeah, that's the one. Would you say that that is a 1.5 story building?
I would say that there isn't enough indication to know. It may well be an unfinished attic, as was with Mr. and Mrs. Neese's property. I myself have the windows themselves are not indicative. My office at 113 South Second, I urge you to drive down the alleyway. You'll see a window in the eaves. There's nothing up there but insulation and heating ducts and things like that. It's not a second story. So I don't think there's sufficient.
Let me ask that question of staff. Darren, are you still on with us somewhere?
Excuse me, I am, Mr. Mayor.
Do you see the photo there on our screen? There's the building below, the actual house that borders adjacent to the south, has upper story windows in what looks like an attic room. Would you define that as a 1.5 story building?
Mr. Mayor, we would define that as a 2-story building because there's a full wall height on the second floor. So 1.5 stories would typically be a tall roof that included a dormer, so that you don't have a full wall height on the second floor, but you have a taller roof that then is typically fitted with a dormer so that the space is usable and occupiable. In that case, I would say you have a second story that has a full wall height above the first story, although it doesn't extend fully to the rear of that structure that you see there.
Oh,
Thank you.
I didn't mean to take that off screen. I'm sorry.
Okay,
You were in the middle of
it
it.
answered my question. Yeah, go ahead.
So I'll have 2 questions, but to add to this conversation, I believe the address of the location that that is pictured as 602 Lincoln. Directly across the street is 609 Lincoln, which I've not been in this home, so I don't know if it's 2-story or not, but I believe that it's 2-story. Just on a drive down here, 1615, 1604 Main Street appear to be 2-story, 1712 Poplar, 1518 Poplar, 1510 Poplar, corner of Main and Monroe, 509, 409 Monroe, 2 on Nicholas, 417 Madison, 1609 and 1611 Cedar. Used to live in an apartment above a garage at 1600 Cedar. There's multiple on Willow, the library, North Summit, Hickory Glen, Walnut, and Division. So I too am curious about what adjacent is. I think that that might be a matter of opinion of scale, as well as and you might not be able to answer this or not. Were the Nixons approached to maybe potentially purchase a piece of their land for this to work?
They actually were.
Okay.
And I think Mr. Nixon will address that in his comments here shortly. But they were approached to buy all of the property of their home, which of course, in today's market in our community, that's a mixed blessing. You might be tempted by it, but then you have to ask yourself where you're going to live. So I think they were asked both to sell all of the property, but also a portion of the property, which they declined to do. With regard to the questions about other properties that you are aware of, Councilman, that are 2-story structures, all I can do is respond by saying that, when I read this ordinance, it says shall relate to that of adjacent structures. I've been accused by my wife of being a literalist, and in fact, I believe that adjacent means adjacent.
Comes with the trade.
Yeah,
Comes with the trade.
comes with the trade. Yeah,
Yeah.
well, I learned a lot of things, and one of them is not to bring the trade home, but that's.
Would across the street be adjacent then? So if in fact that's 602,
Counselor, can I recommend that we have staff weigh in on this because we do have definitions for these. Darren, can you define for the council adjacent for Title IX as it relates to Title IX?
Mr. Mayor, unfortunately, the zoning ordinance does not define adjacent. This is an issue that has given us some amount of trouble in other contexts as well. I can only speak to what the Planning and Zoning Commission, I think, was trying to get at was the context of a single family neighborhood and this housing, being single family like in its townhome form. It's true that they are 2-story, and it's true that the properties immediately adjacent, with the exception of the property to the south, are not 2-story. And so I think what the Planning and Zoning Commission was attempting to do was to fit a single family like product into the neighborhood in the best possible way.
Thank you. And we can add that to the code cleanup list.
It's already on there.
If I could add one more comment about that in response, if I may, I think that the real concern you may have as a council and your legal counsel might have is that without a specific definition of adjacent, trying to, shall we say, draw a rope around a certain number of buildings within a certain radius starts to become a little arbitrary. And that is, again, one of those things that it's one of the buzzwords for agency and council and commission decision-making is that it is subject then to being reversed if we're just drawing our radius based upon what we want to do here or what we think might be comparable rather than some specific defined area. And far be it for me to advise this council. I have my own clients to advise, including cities. But that would be my concern if we simply cherry pick buildings around a general neighborhood. If I could share one more, and then I promise I'll quit. This is, I think, a view that might be of use to you as you look down Poplar Street, which is a street running more or less parallel to Main Street. We all know that Main Street has this weird non-parallel direction in Sandpoint, but these are some of the houses and sort of the architectural presentations of gable end roofs and so forth. I think it again gets to be very arbitrary if we are selecting the, I think it's 602 Lincoln, the one next to the project, and saying, well, that because it has a certain height must be a 2-story or a 1.5 stories. We'll presume that there's living space. Is it any higher? Is it any shorter than the rest of these structures? I can say one thing, it appears that that neighborhood is fairly consistently single family homes. They do not appear to be 2-story homes. Again, they're not adjacent, they're on Poplar Street, but it is something to consider as you weigh this decision tonight. Any other questions?
Yeah, Mr. Mayor, did your clients purchase their property prior to the designation, the 2011 designation of residential multifamily on those 4 parcels?
I should know that, but I'm not sure I know the answer to that, but I think no, I think it was after that 2011 date you just provided.
I can speak to that.
Yeah, thank you.
Mr. Mayor, council members, staff, thank you for your time. The answer is no. We bought that property in November of 2021. That's when we closed on it.
Okay, thank you. And thank you for that presentation, Mr. Featherston. Yeah.
Thank you.
Are there any other questions? I think we got them all.
Thank you.
Okay, thank
Mr.
you.
Mayor, council, thank you for your time.
Did you want to? Absolutely, but if you can pause for 1 minute, I just want to add some clarity on something that was being thrown around. So while we do have vagueness with the definition of adjacent, what I think we all agree on at the very least, the building that borders to the south is adjacent. And that we do have a definition for that from our planning staff and from our city code as being a two-story building. So I think this debate about adjacent really becomes kind of irrelevant because we do have a two-story by definition building to the south that borders the project. That is, it's adjacent and it's two stories. So I think that the rest of that argument kind of is really unnecessary. Sir, please.
Mr. Mayor, would you mind for a quick restroom recess or?
Yeah, that's fine. We can pause for 3 minutes. Is that, can you accomplish it in 3? Everyone, that was a long 3 minutes. Oh,
That's because everybody was using the facilities and he couldn't get there.
okay. Sorry, we'll wait a moment. Apologies.
I was gonna walk in, everybody's staring at him.
Yeah, let's do that.
It's gonna turn red.
You're the mean one.
Please, the floor is yours.
Thank you. Good evening, Mr. Mayor, City Council members and staff. My name is Scott Nixon. I live at 1813 Main Street. My wife Leanna and I are the appellants in today's council hearing. We are in good standing in our Sandpoint community. We were renters on the south side. We got married at Schweitzer and we put our life savings towards a home to start our family. Generally speaking, we are in favor of developments that better our community and most importantly, house our workers and subsequently support local business owners. While we don't personally know the Friedmans, it seems like they've been long contributors to the success of our town as business owners. In August 2021, David Shalowski and Kathy Friedman drove together to our home. They knocked on our door and they introduced themselves as business partners. They did attempt to buy our property in full. We declined to sell. They later returned and attempted to buy 10 feet of our property line. We decided to sell. We decided not to sell. We decided not to sell because we learned that David Shalowski is a convicted felon from Oregon. He was recently sentenced to 6 years in federal prison for real estate fraud, among other charges. He defrauded over $5 million from investors and is currently incarcerated. Needless to say, we've had sleepless nights and anxiety knowing this person is involved in this project. This past Saturday, a vehicle registered to Shalowski circled our home. If he's incarcerated, who is driving his vehicle? What's his involvement in this project? This is why we do not sell a portion of our property. As a Sandpoint property owner, I was instructed to review Title IX to understand my property rights against the conditional permit application. It starts with the definition of adjacent. Is that directly bordering? What about a home across the street? If there's a story height limitation ordinance for structures built adjacent to single story structures, why are we reverting to code about the maximum height in RM zoning? In this instance, 4 of the 5 properties that directly border the project are single story homes. If the rear of these townhome structures are facing the rear yard of our home, why is it being manipulated as a side yard? As a property owner, it's inconsistent decision-making. We now face a 30-foot high structure placed only 5 feet from our property line, spanning the full width of our backyard. If you were in our situation, you would also be confused by the decision-making process. Why are ordinance being misinterpreted? Will these arbitrary decisions become ordinances for future planning? How will these long-standing issues be addressed by our local governing body? This project has the right idea to address housing needs, but it simply does not fit this location in its current state. Thank you for your time. I'd like my wife to speak.
And we do actually have some documentation as well from the FBI about David Shalowski and proof he was at our house and that he was the one involved in the financial transactions. Hello, City Council, Mr. Mayor and staff. My name is Leanna Nixon. I live at 1813 Main Street. My husband and I moved there 2 years ago. I took a job as the executive director of the Sandpoint Nordic Club. I love this community, and we decided to buy a quiet house in a quiet neighborhood in order to raise our family here. We know there's a housing crisis, and we're not against development. We are, however, against development that doesn't adhere to city code. Our lives and our neighbors' lives will be negatively impacted if this project is approved. When we look out of our window, we will see a 2-story, 30-foot high structure along our entire backyard. There will be new shading in our backyard, which will decrease sunlight to our garden and landscaping. In this situation, 1.5 stories versus 2 stories does make a difference. Per city ordinance, this project should be limited to 1.5 stories, given that 4 out of the 5, at least, of the adjacent properties are single story. There will be 40+ people living in this development. By calling what is really a rear yard, a backyard, a side yard, and allowing for this 5-foot setback, there's really no room for privacy landscaping. All 40 tenants will have direct visual access into our backyard and our home, eliminating all of our privacy. We thought about building an accessory dwelling unit in our backyard. If we did this, we'd have to adhere to a 15-foot setback. There would be no question that that was our backyard. You wouldn't call our backyard anything other than what it is. So why does this development get to manipulate what is defined as a side yard versus a rear yard? There's also a public safety issue posed by this project. Picture a scenario where there's a fire in that unit that's furthest in the development, the corner unit. Cars can be parked along that private driveway. Police can't enforce no parking there. It's a private driveway. People will figure that out. There's no visitor parking at these apartment complexes. If a fire truck arrives and there's cars in this road, it won't be able to get past and put out the fire. This puts, all of the surrounding neighbors in danger. Has anyone here been to an apartment complex where there's no visitor parking? There's no parking on Main and Lincoln. That road, both those roads are so narrow. This is a planning oversight. There's a simple solution to address this issue as well as the other issues that we've brought up. Downsize the scale of the development and adhere to what's in the policy. Does City Council want to move forward with this project knowing that there are issues? It cuts corners, and that there was a convicted felon involved and still is. He's in prison. I hope not. So please grant our appeal and deny this project. Thank you for your time.
Any questions for the appellant? All right, thank you for your presentation. Okay, we will now proceed with the public hearing. So each speaker will be allowed 3 minutes. If the appeal if granted would reverse the Planning and Zoning Commission's decision to approve the conditional use permit. Is there anyone who would like to testify in favor of the appeal?
Mr. Mayor, I have a question real quick. I'm sorry. Is there a point where there's rebuttal or am I missing after the public hearing? Thank you. Sorry about that, Mr. Mayor.
No worries.
Mr. Mayor,
Yes.
Susan Prez.
Okay.
I'm Susan Prez. I'm a homeowner and resident at 1708 West Main. Mr. Mayor and City Council members, good evening. I've lived here for 23 years. For the record, I'm opposed to the housing development in question as it stands. I am for the appellates. I appeal to you to seriously consider the concerns I and others have about this project and its impact on the residents of this quiet West Side neighborhood and the precedent it sets for future developments in our town. The reasons I'm opposed, I'm very concerned with the size and scope of this housing complex. It's incompatible with the existing and established homes in the neighborhood and the area. The size and level of intrusion of this project is beyond the scope of normal development and poses a major negative impact on the neighboring houses. It is larger and denser than anything else in the area. Traffic is another concern with the development allowing an additional 50+ people. There could easily be an additional 100 cars a day or more coming and going on Main or Lincoln. Main is very narrow with no sidewalks. Both streets have a lot of foot and bicycle traffic from children accessing Traverse Park and the school. More car traffic is detrimental to foot and bicycle traffic safety. An additional 50+ people on this small parcel would change the established character of single-family homes in the area. The 2-story townhouses are inconsistent with the code. This has been talked about. And when you talk about adjacent, it's the 4 out of 5 is an important aspect of that. I'm concerned about the potential public safety issue of the proposed driveway not being a public road and therefore having no enforcement for keeping the driveway clear for emergency vehicles. Designating this driveway a no parking zone would help, but there is no way to enforce it. I know there is a housing need in our community. This project is currently, as currently applied for, is not the answer to this need. We can do better to address our housing problem than to put a 13 multifamily housing project in an established single-family neighborhood. There are better solutions. A suggested alternative would be to downsize. The good news is you now have the opportunity to review or deny, to change this development application, to preserve an established neighborhood, and to stand up for the longtime residents of our community. I think this is a very serious issue as we move forward with housing problems, to stay with code and to look at what the community needs. We need to make conscious, sensible planning decisions.
Ms. Perez,
is
your time
essential.
is up. Thank
Thank
you.
you very much.
Mr. Mayor, Misty Shepherd.
And Melissa, feel free to interrupt me if you catch me.
Yes, sir.
My name is Misty Shepherd. I live at 623 North Lincoln. I am the house directly across from the lot right now. The pink house is kind of kitty corner to my house. Everybody, all the details. I mean, this is going to impact us. Everyone can say it's not, but you don't live on that street. You don't see what it's like. Farming, all the traffic from farming comes on there. All those kids walk, they bike. I don't know if you've ever been down Lincoln Street when there's something in the park. I can't hardly get my car out of the driveway. When you add an extra driveway and that many extra cars, and let's just face it, I have 3 people in my house. I have 3 cars. You're going to add that much traffic to a little road. That road driveway that they call it is going to come out right at my house. That is 30+ or more cars trying to get out the same spot at the same time. Let's just face it, we're all getting somewhere right around the time the schools start. It is already a dangerous road. Those kids drive fast. When they find that road that goes through where they can cut through, they're going to. It's going, when all those cars are there, you can't see going in and out. They can say it doesn't impact, but they had people coming and cutting down those trees and I could not get out of my own driveway. That road is not big enough for this many extra cars in that smaller space. Main is actually thinner than Lincoln. When you add the people, the cars, the church, the park, all of that, the school's so close by, it is massively traveled. I also want to know what they're going to do with their snow. Let's just face it, we're getting feet of snow this time. Where is all that going? Is it going out by the street? They've already packed it so much that you have to drive singularly through part of the road. You have to pull over and let other people go by. There is so much going on with this that as a safety factor, when my kids were little, I cannot imagine adding 30 cars in one tiny space where all those kids are walking. Traverse Park is busy. Those kids ride their bikes, they walk, most of them by themselves. It is already, the kids don't ride on the bike path all the time. They park, because cars park on the bike path. They drive on the bike path. It goes right past my house. I see it all. You are impacting the safety of the people who live there, trying to just pull out onto the road. You are impacting all those kids trying to walk to school, to drive to school, to walk to the park. You add the church and everything else, there is already a ton of traffic on 2 blocks of Lincoln. You are adding 30, 40 cars to that. There is no guest parking. That means they're parking on those roads too. There is just not enough room for this much. Yes, it wasn't planned well, the streets and everything. Not my fault,
Mr. Mayor.
but
that
it's
is
not
the
fair.
evidence.
Thank you, Madam Shepherd. Appreciate that. Next.
Brent Bidas.
Hi, my name is Brent Bidas and I live at 1804 Main Street, directly across from the proposed development. We probably all agree that there's a housing shortage in Sandpoint, but I strongly believe that this development would be detrimental to both safety and quality of life in this neighborhood. In rough numbers, this will add about 25 cars and 50 people, and this is simply too many people to put in this area. By putting in this many units, there's virtually no open space for the kids to play, and this is being developed as family housing, so there is going to be a lot of kids in this development. Calling the path through this lot a private drive and not a road because there isn't enough room concerns me from a safety standpoint. Are trash and recycling trucks and police going to drive on this private driveway? If so, then we need to call this road a road, and we need to require that it conform to those standards. If not, are trash and recycle bins going to be put out on Main and Lincoln? Having that many bins out every week is going to create traffic and safety problems on roads that are already too narrow. The city has already acknowledged and has plans to widen Main Street in this area. It seems to me that this is a way of trying to skirt established restrictions on roads that are there for everybody's safety, and that's a bad idea. Changing the setbacks to as little as 5 feet also tells me that we're trying to put too many units into too small of an area. It's simply unfair to current homeowners to put a multi-story 4 or 5 unit building just a few feet from their fence overlooking their yards. Now, I seriously doubt there's anybody here who would appreciate that being put in right next to their house. This is a well-established neighborhood with no other developments like this, and this plan does not conform to the character of the neighborhood. Given that an exception to current zoning regulations is required to put in more than 7 units on this new lot, I believe it's entirely appropriate that the neighborhood property owners meet with the developer and the city staff and talk about what's being proposed and see if there's a solution we could all live with. I understand that the city staff has met with the developer on this and come up with this plan, but there was no input from any of the residents. And I think that's an oversight that we need to correct. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Madam Clerk.
Tracy Bidas.
Okay.
I'm sorry.
No comment, she says.
Rocky Pardee.
I'm Rocky Pardee. I live at 1812 Poplar Street. We are south of the lot in between. We have a storm drainage ditch that runs right through our property. I have no idea what will be the water runoff for the new development. That concerns me a lot. I'm against this.
Thank you.
Stan Pardee.
Mayor and City Council, thank you for this opportunity. I live in the same place she does. We've been here 25 years, quarter of a century. I got my first burrito when it was a little bitty hut there. Okay, I have several issues here with this. The first one being in your conformity statement, number 3 is it's supposed to be harmonious. And I looked up harmonious. It says marked by agreement in feeling, forming a pleasingly consistent whole. It doesn't do that. I'm sorry. Nobody I know would say this meets that definition of harmonious. It just doesn't. And looking at this, it's as they said, it's an 80% hard surface. And as my wife alluded to, it's like, where's that runoff going? I know where it goes. It goes all through my backyard, 100%. And it goes around my house and then dumps into the stormwater drain that's literally in my front yard. It's the only stormwater drain for that whole area. And this is going to ramp up that. And while we're talking about the snow, where are they going to push it? Somebody else brought that up. You look down at this thing, it's like, there's no room to push that snow anywhere. Where's it going? You know, I don't know. Tell me. Another person brought up a good point, the trash cans. If this isn't a road, then the city is not going to, or the waste management's not going to come down there and pick up the trash cans at all. Have to be out on the street, out on Lincoln or Main Street. And as somebody also mentioned, there is no parking for guests anywhere. I mean, I'm looking at down at the thing. There's no parking for guests, which means that everybody that shows up there for a birthday party or something is going to have to park on the street. And there's no room to park on the street. It makes it dangerous, as others have said. While I'm thinking about it, this 1602 Lincoln, which was called a 2-story. I'm the next door neighbor. That's not a 2-story. That's a 1.5 stories at the best. I'm sorry, it's just not. I disagree with that. Other issues are these, we say harmonious and it's supposed to be, you know, fit in with the neighborhood. There's no yards. Everything else has yards. All these single family houses have yards, and there's no yards at all in this thing. It's blacktop, it's buildings, and very little green area. And I'm just opposed to it. Thank you very much for the opportunity to get up in front of you. I appreciate your service to the city. Like I said, we've been here 25 years, and I'd like to see something different here. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Pradee. Madam Clerk?
Shelley Munson.
Shelley Munson? Okay.
Jaiming Liu.
Hello everyone, my name is Jaiming Liu. I live in 1808 Poplar Street. Sorry, my English no good. So yeah, many neighbors, they already brought up all the issue if it's going to build an apartment right there. So that's what I'm going to say. So yeah, thank you.
Thank you.
Taylor Bradish.
Good evening. My name is Taylor Bradish and I live at 1015 Poplar Street, and I went on and on at the last hearing, so I'm going to make it short. I'm sure you guys all listened to that, so I'm not going to restate it. I spent 5 years on the Planning and Zoning Commission for the county. So I read the county code forward and backwards, and I read the city code forward and backwards. And I think one of the biggest points that I just want to bring up at this hearing is that there's some statements, there's some justification of, yes, they could come in for a building permit and application for 7 units or less. If they did that, then they would have to abide by the setbacks, by roads, services, and everything else. And they didn't do that because this property is too small. And that's kind of the function of why there's a conditional use permit. You know, it's a use based on conditions. You put additional conditions on it so that you can give leeway in other codes. This project throws all the codes out the window. It's a double frontage lot for 13 residences, not just one house, 13 residents. The setbacks, the services, the roads, the garage. If you have a Suburban and you try to back out into a 26-foot right of way, you're going to need a turning radius of 14 feet. That'll leave less than 8 feet to the outside of the curb to turn. So even if you have long trucks in how it's designed right now, you wouldn't even have the on-street parking in the private residence. So it pushes everybody onto Main and Lincoln. That if there's 13 3-bedroom places and they have kids that come of age, that's a lot of cars. That is 40 cars, not even including a boat or an ATV. You're potentially looking at blocks and blocks impacted in every direction because of the parking. The staff pushed them to this design to get around of every single zoning requirement that is in our code. You know, it's not your code, it's our code as citizens. And we need to follow it, especially when it comes to high density, impactful development like this. Like it's been said over and over, we need housing, but this is not the spot. It's a safety hazard. It breaks pretty much every code we have. And if you're gonna grant a conditional use permit, the point is you grant additional conditions to lessen the impact to the neighborhood. This does none of that. And I really hope that you guys turn this down, because I'm gonna have to look at it for the rest of my life, because I ride my bike by there almost every day. So thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Radish.
Butch Horton.
Hey, I'm Butch Horton, and I don't know how it happened, but the young man in front of me said everything I was going to say. So thank you very much.
Chris Weens.
Chris Wings. Okay, we'll call him again next.
Mr. Mayor, that would be the end of those who are in favor of
Okay.
the appeal.
Are you sure that he's out there and coming back? Okay, I'll give you a moment to check. Thanks. Next, we will hear those who are neutral to the applicant. But we're going to wait just a moment and give Chris Wings a chance. This is how much we value public testimony. Okay, thank you. All right, next we will hear from those who are neutral to the applicant.
Chris Steichen.
Good evening. I'm neutral from the sense that I think more information needs to be gathered. I don't know about other people in the room, but I had a gut punch when I heard the name David Aaron Shavalsky. I did some quick research on him in the back. He's been convicted 3 times of fraud, and District Attorney of Oregon was involved. There's an FBI affidavit, there's a court docket, and there's a lot of information on this gentleman. How he made his way to this area, why and when, are questions that are at a minimum of curiosity and at a maximum of grave concern. I do think that there should be a formal interviews asking the Nixons what the conversation was, if the owner of the property was with Shavalsky the entire time, if they came in the same car or not, and get that all on formal record and basically look into the situation. Affordable housing and danger being brought to your doorstep should not be said in the same sentence. I'll shift to the comment of the map of the development, and there were no sidewalks. I think people have made that evident. Also, when there's a rendition with really beautiful mature trees, you have to see past that. And it looked very, very pretty, but those mature trees likely are not going to be there for the reason that Leanna Nixon said. There's simply no room for the mature landscaping. I drove by, and the trees are already clear cut and being burned. So I'm not sure where that mature landscaping on the rendition is coming from. Shavalsky, my quick research shows it correct, what is now in federal prison. He was recently incarcerated, and he's in federal prison in Colorado. This is a rich history. It concerns me. If this conversation that the Nixons had to endure, was it probing? Was it predatory? Why would we want to interview Leanna Nixon, Scott, and perhaps the owner on record about what those conversations were? Well, one reason that comes to mind is so that you can correlate what happened or did not happen during the planning and zoning meetings. I did watch the planning and zoning meetings under the direction of Darren Fluke, interim city planner, and interruptions were made. And I find it curious that some of the things that were granted for this project, I'd be curious to know if those were presented initially in the conversation to the Nixons. If that be the case, that would be highly coincidental. Thank you so much for your time. I really appreciate you all. Thank you.
Yeah. Yeah, ma'am, can you please state your address? Thank you.
I live in Ponderay, but I'm actually not comfortable stating my address. Nobody else did so. So I respect that you request that, but I'm going to go ahead and decline that if I may.
Yeah, you can just state you live in Ponderay, and for the record, everybody else did state there. So thank you.
Yeah, but you had asked me for my address or?
Yes, everybody needs to state their name and their address where they reside, but just state Ponderay.
Okay, I am a non-resident of Sandpoint. I'm in Ponderay. Thank you. Thanks for the question.
Sure.
Thank you.
Mr. Mayor, there is no one else who has signed up to speak who is neutral.
Okay. We will now hear from those who would like to testify who are opposed to the appeal.
Ned Brandenberger.
Hello, I am Ned Brandenberger and I live within the city of Sandpoint. And I own Sandpoint Property Management. So yes, this project will help to alleviate the severe housing shortage. I've looked at the project. I'm familiar with that neighborhood. I used to own a house there. I think it's beautiful. I mean, I think it's actually going to be a great addition to that neighborhood, and I think it probably will have a positive effect on property values. You know, the development should occur within the city. The city has the infrastructure, they've got the sewer, they've got the water, they have the streets. So when you talk about 13 units that are higher density versus 13 homes, you're talking about a lot of impact on the environment. You know, that's a private road, right? The city doesn't have to maintain that road. They don't have to maintain a road and the curbs to 13 different houses. The city doesn't have to plow that road that goes through to these units. Stephen Snedden talked about sewer and water lines. Well, guess what? Higher density housing, they use less water and consequently less sewer. So, you know, you're not going to see people out washing their cars and watering the lawns and forgetting to turn the water off and those kind of things. You know, and they pay, and this is a project that will pay, it's a new project that will pay property taxes. And it's tough to make the numbers work when you're talking about density, but when you're looking at the beautiful place we live in and the environment, you know, the answer is higher density housing within the city. So I am against the appeal and I am for this project. Thank you.
Appreciate those comments.
Sharice Moore.
I'm Sharice Moore. I live in Sago. I do own 2 properties just a few doors down from the development. I feel that it will enhance the neighborhood. It'll improve values in the future. I brought, there's been a couple that have mentioned the density in the development. If you would pull up a packet that I brought everyone, I think, and it just shows, so that the development, it has 1.15 acres that they're proposing building on. That 7-plex that you have in front of you is 0.36 of an acre. The second page shows the configuration of the land. Sorry, I hate talking, but I think the development is well planned. and is a great asset to our community, and I hope you guys approve it. That's it.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Tom Renfro.
My name's Tom Renfro. I live in Sagal. I've lived here for most of my 73 years. And I have lived in town. I've lived north of town in Elmira, and I've lived south as far as Duford. And I've watched this town grow from basically a really small town. When I was a little kid, I'd come out here and fish on the lake, and the downtown was just small. And every time the town has expanded, this same kind of a issue has arisen. But I have never seen an influx like we've seen in the last year. And so housing is truly an issue. Property values have gone out of control. A property that I sold about 6 years ago for $230,000 went on sale for $1.2 million. So there is a definite need for housing, and I get it. People that nobody wants it in their backyard, but I've lived in townhouses in Sandpoint, and they're really nice communities. And they had the same issue. They had private drives, and they had their own snow removal, and there was never any issue with it when that was going on. So I'm in favor of the project going forward. I mean, I understand people don't want something in their backyard if it's new. It's hard to accept that, but it's part of growth in this town. And if our Planning and Zoning Commission has done their job, and I have to assume that they have, I don't see any reason for it not to go forward. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Renfro.
Mr. Mayor, that is all I have signed up to speak. For the record, there are 2 people participating online, but they do not wish to speak.
Thank you. I appreciate that, Madam Clerk. Okay. At this time, actually, let me say it this way. Before the public hearing is closed, we'll offer an opportunity for rebuttal testimony from both parties. This will be a one-time rebuttal. We will not continue to go back and forth with rebuttal to rebuttal and so on. But please be advised that any new facts that are listed during rebuttal, the public must be given an opportunity to comment on any new facts. At this time, would the applicant care to offer any rebuttal testimony? Yes.
Okay, I probably won't be able to address all of the people that spoke and rebut all of them, but I want to touch on some key points. The attorney brought up there's a potential replot where the fence is in the wrong way. The property has been surveyed, and actually the fence is encroaching on our property. So I just wanted to clarify that. It's Mrs. Nixon referred to this as an apartment project. It's not an apartment project. I think that's pretty clear. And another person at 1812 Poplar indicated that she was concerned about the water. All the water has to remain on site. That's how it has to be. The comments about David Shalofsky. David is an incredible human being. What was shared was inaccurate and extremely irrelevant. Now I'd like to get into the basis for the appeal. The multifamily zoning is inconsistent with Sandpoint comp plan, and the property zone CA3 and CA2 is not only located, not the only location suitable for the project. CA2 and 3 are not zones as they have stated. The property is zoned residential multifamily. This entitles us to all the rights of use within the RM zone. The Nixons purchased their property in 2020, as was indicated, and it was zoned residential multifamily when they purchased that. They claimed they researched the comp plan when buying and thinking this was slated to become CA2 or RS. However, it is the zoning in place that governs the use of the land. Let's see here. In turn, the zoning mistake allows for development of 2 4-unit structures on what should be a single-family home with small accessory dwellings. This is not a zoning mistake. The parcels always have had entitlement to multifamily residential. And what should be is dependent on the property owner asking for a rezoning that they reduce the density potential of their property. Further, the comp plan areas are, again, watercolors or lines, fuzzy lines, aspirational for sure, and important, but not bright lines at the parcel level that is zoning. Idaho code grants officials great flexibility to interpret the comp plan, and there's no standard in the Idaho code, only that zone changes need to be in accordance with the comp plan. The next one, multifamily zoning, is in direct conflict with CA2 designation set by the comprehensive plan, which violates state code. I'm not sure what code they're referring to, but that is not accurate, probably a misunderstanding. The next is Sandpoint neighborhood scale 9-4-2-3. The project is adjacent to single-story structures and allowed to build 1.5-story structures. However, city staff approved 2-story structures. First, city staff does not approve CUPs. The P&Z is who approves, the P&Z commission does. Next, the neighborhood scale section reads as follows. Neighborhood scale, the scale of those buildings developed within an existing neighborhood shall conform to the established scale. Appropriate scale multifamily development shall be achieved through the adherence of the following. The overall height of the multifamily structure shall relate to the adjacent structures by avoiding construction that varies greatly in height from adjacent buildings. Again, we are at somewhere south of 29 feet. And I didn't go measure the neighbor's property, but we're probably pretty close. But again, that would have to be confirmed. Anyway, I'm going to stop there on that one. Okay. The 2-story structures do not conform with our existing neighborhood scale. Again, it's sort of the interpretation of what the neighborhood, right? Not necessarily adjoining properties, but properties in the neighborhood. I think we defined that pretty well. And the neighborhood scale ordinance and subsequent height limitations was disregarded and superseded by the building height ordinance. It's really not relevant to the discussion. You're adhering to the zoning standard for overall height. And as I get close to the end here, the rear yard misclassification is side yard to allow a 5-foot setback. I think we've stated what we would like to see related to that. And in closing, so as we wrap up, I'd like to, first of all, say thank you to you guys. Boy, you guys have a tough job. I wouldn't want your job, that's for sure. I appreciate what you must go through and what you had to go through even before we got here tonight. So that's important. So thank you for that. And thank you, Mayor, for being here and leading the process. I'd also like to thank the people who offered their time tonight to speak. The community belongs to all of us, and it's important that we all participate in deciding its future, those that were for our project and those that were against our project. The project is owned entirely by William and Kathy Friedman. I want to make that real clear. We look forward to a successful outcome to move this project forward. The city and its local businesses truly need this housing. Thanks.
And I'd just like to add, if there's any questions about David Shalofsky, we can discuss it with the city attorney or Chief Corey Kuhn. Everybody's aware of the situation.
Thanks, guys.
Any questions?
Thank you.
Questions?
No, I don't think that has any relevance here, but thank you.
Yeah. Okay.
Okay, now I would invite the appellant to come forward with any rebuttal.
Hello, we're back. Thanks again for your time. I just want to quickly say that saying that the David Shalofsky thing doesn't have any relevance is pretty hard for me to hear. We reached out to the FBI and he was not supposed to be involved in any real estate transactions during this time that he came to our house and offered to buy our house in the same car as Kathy Friedman and introduced themselves as business partners. We reached out to the FBI. We told them about this. We have documentation on our Nest, text messages with him. The reason that he is now in jail is because he was involved in this project. So it's relevant and we want to know, how was he involved? We have a lot of questions, so.
I think the bigger issue here is introducing a person of this character caliber to our community to represent a project that's supposed to create opportunity for our workers. That is a very poor representation of someone to knock on our door and to give us a false name of Dave Aaron and find out later that this person is a convict and not a first-time convict, was convicted in 2008 of $1.5 million embezzlement from US Bank. So this was his second time doing this. So to bring this person to our front door was intimidating, candidly. So I'd like to share that to offer some context. We provided documentation around the FBI and also their declaration of the sentencing when he was sentenced to 6 years in prison.
If I may pass forward, we have copies of both the sentencing memorandum from the U.S. Attorney's Office in Oregon. Quite frankly, coming in here today, I wasn't quite sure what the applicant's response would be to this issue. It wasn't really discussed at the prior proceeding in the commission. The response today seems to be, don't worry about it. He's a great guy and it's not relevant. As you just heard, I think it is relevant. I'll talk just briefly about why it is relevant. There's an article from the U.S. Attorney's Office as well as the U.S. Attorney's Memorandum. I have copies for the council if I could pass that forward to review.
And let me say this, Mr. and Mrs. Nixon, I can appreciate how you must feel the concern of somebody coming to your house and, you know, with a criminal record and, you know, offering a real estate transaction. I can understand how that is weird, uncomfortable, creepy, all that stuff. I get that. What I'm saying is what's before this council here today is a decision of whether or not to approve your appeal, right? And this is about a conditional use permit that we have code to follow that gives us guidance on whether or not to approve this conditional land use application, okay? So whoever this person is has no relevance in the council's decision of whether or not to look at the code and apply the code to this land use decision, okay?
That's correct. Have you heard of his name before tonight?
No, and it's yeah.
Appropriate to disseminate this information to council at this point. I also would like the council to be aware that this issue was brought to city staff and to legal counsel previous to the planning and zoning hearing. The issue was turned over to the Sandpoint Chief of Police, Corey Cohn, and he was unable to be here tonight, but I have a quote from him for the record that says, upon becoming aware of the Nixon's concerns regarding Mr. Shalofsky, city police reviewed the matter and we are not aware of any crimes committed within our jurisdiction. So the within our jurisdiction is the critical aspect here, and that's a quote from Chief Cohn for the record for this evening.
Please continue.
So I don't want to belabor the point. I think the point here is if you have an applicant, one of whom is a partner who should not be a partner in real estate development because he's currently convicted, previously under investigation, under probation, parole conditions that do not permit him to be, you have to ask yourself as a decision maker, what is the project going to do? Is it going to succeed or not? Is this project going to come to fruition? Who is going to be left in the wake of the project along the way, if in fact this gentleman is involved? I did not hear the applicants disavow his involvement, except to say we are the owners of the property. But I think we're all sophisticated enough to know that that does not mean he's not involved. And he represented himself in the presence of Mrs. Friedman, the applicant, as being a partner. So I'll leave it at that. I'll move to the next issue if I may. And what the council chooses to do with that, I just put it out there. There's a point made, I think, by one of the neutral or the neutral comment. How many times did he come to their home? It was twice. Mrs. Friedman was present with him both times. The second time, the Nixons did not respond or answer the door, but he was observed with Mrs. Friedman. The points I will make with regard to the opposed comments from the public are interesting. These are fine people, I'm sure. I know two of the three. Ned Brandenberger is, as he said, owns a property management company, has been very successful. This of course, has been presented to you as rental property that will be rental units. Ms. Moore, Sharice Moore, is a very accomplished realtor in this community, has done very well over the years. But your record reflects that she sold the property to ZPD. The deed is in your file. Sharice Moore to ZPD, the applicant. Does that make her comments not worthy of listening to? No, I'm simply suggesting to you that comments in favor of the application and against the appeal have some vested interest attached to them. I don't know Mr. Renfro. I don't know his interest other than perhaps to see more housing, which is applaudable. That is certainly an admirable position to take. The neutral comment, I think, also made the point that I failed to make, that landscaping in the renderings are very nice, but as you know, and you saw in the photos I projected on screen, and none of that landscaping exists today. So what we're going to have is new construction, 2 stories tall if approved, with a 5 to 6 foot setback from the Nixon home. There will be no space available for mature landscaping ever, but certainly not in the foreseeable decades. Mr. Friedman made a point that I think is crucial as we talk about the Friedman's application, is that he has surveyed it and as I heard him say just now, confirmed that in fact that fence continues to be encroaching onto the applicant's property. So what I am suggesting to you as a council is that that fence has been there now for more than 18 years. Under Idaho code, under Idaho law, adverse possession accrues after 5 years prior to 2006 of continuous enclosure by a fence. The Nixons have the right and will likely assert the legal right to ownership up to that fence. That changes the equation for this setback by 5.8 feet. And actually, because they are projecting, the applicant is projecting a setback of 6 feet from the true property line, it puts that structure on the fence. There's a 0 setback in the applicant's proposal at this point, because they've just confirmed to you that in order to meet the setback, they will have to try to acquire back from the Nixons the 6 feet, nearly 6 feet of land that has been adversely possessed for the past 20 years. I think for the most part, the other points don't really require a response. I would point direct to sort of give a broader perspective, the council back to this notion that your use regulations found in 9-4-2-2 they direct that these use regulations are intended to create opportunities for new types of housing that seamlessly integrate with existing neighborhoods in the area. I would respectfully suggest to you, it's not an easy decision, I understand, with the crisis in housing. This is not a seamless integration with the existing neighborhood. Any questions for me? Otherwise, I think that is, oh, excuse me, one other point. Mrs. Nixon made the point during her original comments that there was a concern about fire safety. If we can have the site plan put on screen again, I'd like to just touch on that for one more minute, if I may. I'll speak. Yeah, if it can be. Thank you. So I think what Mrs. Nixon was suggesting to you, if you look at the site plan, imagine for a moment there is a fire in building 2, the 4-unit townhome in the corner of the private drive. Imagine that that is inaccessible because of parked vehicles along the road. The appellants have indicated that they would not allow parking. The problem there is it is a private drive. Your city police, I don't believe, under state law, case law, are entitled to go in and enforce that on private drives. Your city police, in fact, I can give you the site, the case site. State versus Foster, 127 Idaho 723. This is an Idaho appellate decision in 1995. Held that there is no law enforcement mechanism on private drives or private parking areas. I think the exception, and counsel for the city could confirm this to you, but the exception may be if they were in hot pursuit of a felon or suspected felon or other serious misdemeanor. Obviously, parking violations are not that. This is a real safety issue. There's no mechanism to enforce enforce non-parking on that drive. As a result, you can imagine a fire vehicle trying to get to that townhouse in the middle of winter. Let me add that equation to it, which is, I think we know statistically, where most of these home fires occur, furnaces are running at extra capacity, et cetera. You're not going to get a fire truck there. They're not going to get past the parked vehicles. They'll be lucky to get past the snow berms. And if there's one parked vehicle, heaven forbid 2 or 3, the fire structure will burn. And there's a great risk that it burns the Nixon's home as well. So thank you. Appreciate your time this evening.
All right, thank you.
Questions for me?
Nope, I think we're good. Thank you. Okay, the public hearing is now closed. At this time, the council will deliberate. No new information may be provided, and questions may be directed only to city staff during deliberation. Councilors, do you have any questions for staff at this time?
Mr. Mayor?
Yeah.
Jennifer or Amanda, I'm not sure who exactly, or Darren. There's been a lot of conversation about with the private drive and snow, which I do think is a very good question. If I understand correctly, the property owners would be responsible for snow removal. And I guess my question would be, in a situation like this, are those properties on Division where they have that other private drive, where does the snow go in those situations? And does the city help out with that? Or can Amanda or somebody, I mean, am I being very clear?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
He's
coming. Yeah.
Thank you, Amanda. Sorry.
And I had a similar question, Joel, and I see that there's water and snow storage
Okay.
at several points in the site plan that you have before you here, both bordering the street adjacent to the sidewalk, as well as between the buildings essentially and at the ends of the buildings. But please.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. You answered it well, actually. They are required to provide snow storage for the site, as are other developments of this nature. And no, city crews do not plow this access.
Right. And from your professional opinion, is that adequate space for that much snow removal?
As attorneys would say, it depends.
Right.
It depends on the amount of snow that we get. So no doubt it will at times not be sufficient, and at other times it will be more than adequately sufficient. What we don't allow is for them to plow the snow onto our city streets, and we do enforce that.
So in theory, it's possible that there'd be so much snow that they'd have no other place to put it, but possibly in the private driveway itself, which could hinder having access to both. Is that theoretically possible?
I would say unlikely, albeit anything is theoretically possible. A minimum of 14-foot width is required for a fire truck. The 26 feet was required and provided as we consulted with our fire chief as well as our deputy fire marshal to account for those types of conditions as well.
Appreciate that.
You're welcome.
Since I have you up here, I have one more question. If we get a heavy snowfall and everything starts melting, there was a gentleman that was concerned about the water going to his property. I also heard from the applicant that that's not a concern. So who's right?
It depends.
Okay.
Our city code, our stormwater ordinance requires that the water is retained on site at a certain year event, meaning how much rainfall in a given event. So if we have 100-year snow or 100-year rain event, then there is a potential that the project wouldn't be designed for that capacity, just like a variety of other properties throughout town. However, they are required to meet city code, and we will do a thorough evaluation of that.
Awesome. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Before you go anywhere. Oh,
Yeah.
You first.
You're
Maybe
probably going to ask it. Go ahead.
The garbage. So I,
There you go.
Was that it?
Yep. that was it.
Okay. So of course, all the units have private garbage storage out in front of the unit. The question is, will waste management go through the private drive and manage the garbage there, or will they have to wheel the garbage out onto the street?
The former. And more than likely, actually, when we do a final site plan review with this, we'll find that there will be a single location for all trash, and there won't be 26 trash cans on this property.
Okay, it appears, and I'm actually not seeing it. It looks like the whatever the larger 5 units are, that they have their own private in front, but then the townhouses maybe have a shared.
Those details get worked out during the final site plan and would be in accordance with waste management direction. Mhm.
I think that's all I had for Amanda.
Right, so you had garbage, right? Okay, so snow, garbage, and then there was some talks about police, fire, how are we gonna get trucks through there? So if that's something that I know that you're not police or fire, but you have thoughtfully thought through this, so there should be some answers. On top of that, there's been, I'll say, accusations that city staff has not followed the rules or are breaking rules, I think was the quote. If there's anything that you would like to clear the record up and help us understand how city has followed the rules, maybe legal can weigh in on this, as well as, and this is just one comment, I do believe that this council has been very mindful and conservative about where infill may or may not occur, as well as saying no more often than yes to things that have not been deemed compatible. So I believe that this group has done it, will continue to be mindful. So if you would, please.
Absolutely. Mr. Mayor, would you like me to respond? Regarding your question around police and fire access, the appellant's comments that our police are unable to enforce parking on private property is absolutely correct. That is the case in all of our multifamily developments throughout town. We require that the private property owner enforce that. Again, going back to my previous comments on the width of the access, that is trying to take some of those things into consideration, as are the 2 entrance points. So some developments, depending on their scale, are allowed by fire code to only have a single entrance to kind of resolve some of your concerns there, or maybe not resolve, but mitigate. 2 entrance points are required for those reasons. As far as, is there anything city staff can weigh in on as far as things that we've heard or not followed procedures? I would, I guess, defer to Darren. I don't have anything to offer as far as a correction in the record at this time, but maybe Darren does, and he could probably speak more to our review process.
Thank you.
You're welcome. Is there anything else?
I think that's it. Thanks, Amanda. Appreciate
You're
it.
welcome.
Mr. Mayor, may I say something? Just in case for the public, you may not have been involved in any of these meetings. Unfortunately, we've been in far too many. And I just want to be clear, just for those who may be new, that the questions we ask, I just want to encourage you, we're not trying to be facetious or silly. We're just trying to do our due diligence and do what's fair for the community and their questions. So some of them seem silly, like theoretically. I just want to let you know that we've been in far too many of these. So we just want to be thorough and just want to encourage you guys with that, if possibly, if you're new. Thank you.
Okay.
I have a
Yeah,
question.
go ahead.
Darren, can you answer, was it, I know the traffic was concerned, was a study necessary, a traffic study? Like we do in some of the developments, or is because this would be too small to do a traffic study?
Mr. Mayor, council member, a traffic study was not warranted by the size of this project.
Okay. And also I believe I heard in the P and Z hearing that even though some may ignore it, it will be signage with no parking. Is that correct?
That is correct, council member.
Thank you.
Mr. Mayor?
Yeah.
Mayor. Darren, can you speak to residential multifamily rear yard setbacks? And what is the front yard setback?
Front and rear yard setbacks are both 15 feet. Side yard setbacks are 5.
Or 5 feet?
And the difficulty here is not with what the setback is or is not, it's with the orientation of the lots. And as you can see, with a very long lot like this, and frontage on a street here, this is your front lot here, so you get
Share your
15.
screen, Darren. We can't see your screen.
Sorry, I thought I got it. Let me reshare there. Sorry about that. I don't know why it's taking. How's that?
Yeah, thank you.
Okay. So the difficulty with the setbacks here again is that the front setback is what adjoins the street frontage. So on the Lincoln Street parcels, this would be your front. We'd
Okay,
have a
Darren, so that's, I don't mean to interrupt you, but we are getting quite late in the evening here. And my question was more relative to, I understand what the front yard is relative to the street, but relative to the configuration of the buildings, front yard and backyard to me are different. So I guess I'm asking how staff and you came to decide that that smaller setback would happen behind a building.
Mr. Mayor, council member, we didn't decide anything. This is what was proposed by the applicant, and we merely tried to apply the code in the best and most logical way that we could. That is the question in front of the council this evening, or a question in front of you. I would note for the record that the Planning and Zoning Commission did have that same concern, and they therefore did require that the second story be a minimum of 15 feet from the property line. In my estimation, the way that condition was conveyed to us and the way it was written, you could either pull the entire building 15 feet to the south, which may require a lot line adjustment or the acquisition of additional property to the south, or it could mean stepping the building back an additional 10 feet from the first story to comply with that condition. Either of those would work. But the Planning and Zoning Commission did consider that, and that is a condition on there today.
Okay, thank you for clarifying that for me and for the public to better understand how that works.
And Darren, I would actually ask you to go a little further there. Can you share with us maybe a precedence of other examples where we've made that determination administratively in the past?
Mr. Mayor, I can't think of anything off the top of my head. We would not be allowed to do that sort of, or to levy that sort of a condition as staff on an administrative review. This being a conditional use that is fully within the purview of the Planning and Zoning Commission to place conditions of approval on the project that, in their view, make it more compatible with surrounding development. And so that is what the Planning and Zoning Commission did.
And I guess, Fonda, I'm asking for some, I guess, guidance here. If we've, has the commission, is there an example where the code has been applied like this in the past and it has been, there's precedence here?
I guess I need some clarification on applied like how.
Yeah, so, this is the question, right? Is the frontage is considered the lot line fronting the street, right? But in this case, the issue is the building orientation, because there's a private drive. Now the building orientation is such that as the appellant is claiming the frontage should be the private drive. And the rear setback should be what is called the side yard setback here. So my question is simply, is this the first time that this has ever come up? And, I mean, certainly it isn't, but but I'm just wondering, in terms of consistency of application of the standard, is this something that has been applied in this way before? And so there's precedence, and I know I'm putting everybody on the spot here because nobody has apparently any other examples to relate this to, but
I couldn't answer that on the spot, Mr. Mayor. I would have to do some research and look into that for you.
okay.
Mr. Mayor, if I might, just to add a little clarification, I've pulled the findings up that we're required to find to approve the project. And essentially, if you look at either number 2 or number 3 here, that's where the authority comes to go above and beyond what the code may or may not require in a given instance. So in the view of the Planning and Zoning Commission, this project was made compatible or more compatible with the surrounding neighborhood by increasing the setback. And so that is a condition of approval on there right now, unless the council should vote to change that. That's how it is. And so that's where the authority comes from, is from this idea that the project be conditioned so that it is compatible with surrounding land uses.
Thank you, Darren.
I had a question for Fonda. Can you verify, so when an applicant comes forward to put their permit in, I'm assuming it's required who owns the property and such. How does that part of our system work?
So when an application comes through, we do a verification of ownership. Yes.
Okay, and can you clarify who the owner of the property is?
Why don't you go on and I'll just look it up online so that we are
Okay.
thorough.
We probably all have questions for you at this point, Fonda. So you just take your time.
Yeah, Mr. Mayor, if you don't mind, while Fonda's looking up that, Darren, I have a question for you, because I think most of what we've heard right now falls under number 3, and will this be harmonious with the intended character of the vicinity and the neighborhood? What would the alternative be right now if the Friedmans took a look at developing lots 1 through 3 and then lots 4? Right? They would not have to get a CUP to develop 7 lots or 7 units on parcels 1 through 3, correct?
Mr. Mayor, council member, that's correct.
And then what would that private drive be like? You'd have an approach from Lincoln. You'd also have an approach from Maine. If you develop those 2 instead of simultaneously as 1 lot, but develop lots 1 through 3 and then lots 4. Would that private drive connect if they did those separately in 2 different phases?
Mr. Mayor, council member, typically not. This is a little bit interesting. I'm trying to think through something that would prevent a private property owner from connecting those drives if they so desired. I can't think of anything that would prevent it. But if we were reviewing a building permit, it would not be something that we would require. We would require a 26-foot access drive along with an approved turnaround at the terminus, so that a fire truck, were it to pull in there, could get turned around and get pulled back out without backing. And so that would be something that would look different, as there would need to be a turnaround at the end of the drive rather than connecting through. As Amanda correctly pointed out, that two entrances is compliant with the fire code, because in the event that one entrance gets blocked, you have another way to get both in and out. So
with that said, theoretically, the applicants could change the parceling on this piece of property 1 through 3 and develop that without having to get a CUP, as well as develop parcel 4 without getting a CUP, if they keep it to 7 or less units.
Mr. Mayor, that council member, that is more or less correct. I noted it for you in the staff report on page 9 of 13 that the Lincoln Street parcels combined would be allowed 7 units without a conditional use permit, and that the main parcel would be allowed 6 units without a conditional use permit.
And then with that said, would we still be dealing with on above building 2 and the 5-foot setback? Would we still be looking at that as a side yard if they were 2 different projects? Right above building 2 on lot 2 and 3. Would that be still considered a side unit where we have the
Yes.
5-foot setback?
Mr. Mayor and council member, that's correct. And so this is exactly how we would have to apply setbacks if they came in on an individual basis. Again, because the frontage is here, these by definition, this is the rear and these are the sides. The appellant's property has frontage here, so that's their front yard. This is their rear yard, and these are the sides. So it's all based on the orientation of the lot itself to the public street frontage. Mr. Mayor.
Yeah.
On that vein, Darren, I think good questions, Counselor. It was stated by one of the citizens that if they applied for 2 different permits, that the setbacks would be completely different. That was the reason we had the CUPs, that the setbacks would look completely different. Is that correct? Mr. Mayor, council member, it is not correct. This is exactly how the setbacks would be applied were they to come in as 2 separate projects. Thank you very much.
Mr. Mayor,
Yeah.
Fonda, do you have an answer for us?
I do. All 4 parcels are owned by ZPD Lincoln LLC, who is the applicant. And I've gone one step further. The Idaho Secretary of State application reflects that ZPD Lincoln LLC, the governors as applied in August 7th of 2021. So the owners of that LLC or members are Kathy Friedman and William Friedman.
Okay, thank you very much.
All right, Fonda, I have a few for you. The cross appeal filing, does the city council have the authority to remove that condition placed by the Planning and Zoning Commission of the 10-foot setback for the second story if that cross appeal was not filed by the applicant?
Yes, this is a de novo review. I was purely making a point of clarification with regards to procedure for the record. A trial de novo or a hearing de novo for you is a new review of the elements to be considered. So that's what you have before you tonight.
So
Is a
the
fresh
council
review.
has full discretion to remove or make any new conditions.
That's correct.
Okay, thank you. Then the other question that came up was regarding the boundary on the north side of basically north side of what would be building 2. Yeah. And as we heard, the applicant, the appellant claims that the fence is 5 feet. Well, both parties seem to believe that the fence is 5 feet on the side of the applicant's property. But the appellant claims that because it's been 18 plus years, Idaho statute basically says that property is then ceded to the, because the fence has been, because the property owner to the north has claimed that property for more than 5 years, that it now belongs to them. Is that a fact?
So it will enable that allegation and or the timing of those facts as articulated by Mr. Featherston would give the Nixons the ability to file a claim against the LLC, if you will, for adverse possession. That is not a determination that this council has any jurisdiction or authority to make, but that could be a legal action that would essentially stay any activity on the property until that boundary line dispute was resolved.
Okay.
but I didn't hear that an action had been filed, just that it possibly could be filed.
Thank you. I think that helps clarify.
Go ahead.
ahead.
Get more for Fonda,
Yeah,
go ahead.
I'm looking, no, go ahead.
Yeah, Mr. Mayor. First, I want to say, again, thank you for everybody for being here this late. I have 4 kids. There's nothing more I'd love to do than be home with them, but this is our duty as elected officials, and I'll be here till midnight if I have to. So we just want to make sure we do our due diligence. So timing for me is ultimately not a concern. So I want to make sure that I fully am aware of all the details. Darren, if I may, I'm personally having a hard time. I understand why the front property would be considered the front property on Lincoln and Main, but I'm having a hard time reconciling and understanding. I could understand that without a private drive, Darren, and I'm not on planning and zoning. Is there a possibility through planning and zoning that they could have looked at that private drive and considered the opposite, that the private drive where the cars are parked, that would be considered the front, and where the sides are at and the back facing adjacent to the property owners, that would be the back? Is that possible? They could have gone that route.
Mr. Mayor, council member, that's essentially what they did by requiring a 15-foot setback for the second story. The only difference, I guess I'll point out into what you're asking and what the P&Z did was, instead of saying the entire building had to be 15 feet from the property line, they said that the second story wall had to be 15 feet from the property line. And that allowed the applicant either the option of articulating the building, as has been discussed, or moving the entire building to the south.
I appreciate that. Thank you.
So Fonda, sorry to belabor that last point, but just to be absolutely crystal clear on the property survey, because it does, any decision that this body makes, ultimately would be stayed potentially if the appellant, for instance, wanted to sue, or vice versa, to determine, to verify that property boundary, right? So it doesn't really, that decision or the validity of that boundary doesn't really apply to our decision here today.
You have evidence of a boundary and a survey boundary in front of you. What's been articulated is that the Nixons, it's Nixon, correct? I said that
Yeah.
right. The Nixons, potentially based on that survey, have a legal right that they would like to exercise against the Freedmans. That's between them. You have a legal boundary in front of you tonight.
Okay,
There
thank you.
just may be ramifications of the outcome of that later.
Appreciate that. Okay, my questions are answered. How's everybody else doing?
I guess, Mr. Mayor, I don't, please forgive me if I missed it. Was a question, I guess Mr. Kuhn isn't here tonight. Was there a question asked about the concern of safety with the cars and the parking and not having guests? Yeah, I understand completely. It's not an apartment complex, and I don't think, I think that was just suggested. I don't think it was ever called one, but there is no guest parking. I guess Mr. Kuhn's not here tonight to talk about, is there any other concerns in other areas with buildings like this without guest parking, and say there's 3 cars in the household, what that would look like?
Joe, we can ask it this way. Amanda, does this project meet the parking standards of the city of Sandpoint?
Sorry, Amanda. I try to get Mr. Kuhn, but.
Okay, Mr. Mayor, the answer is yes, it does. We have minimum standards for parking, and they have provided more than those minimums.
Thank
And
you.
if I can add on to that question, so when through the process, it goes through fire and through police, right? So they are well aware of everything and they approve that, correct?
Police is technically not a
Or they
reviewer.
give their opinion on if they can.
When police has an applicable aspect in a review, we would engage them.
Mhm.
Police has not reviewed this development application. But yes, fire is one. We really, as I think Darren has articulated, when we receive a application of this nature, the primary code provisions that we're reviewing are related to zoning. We look at subdivision codes, we look at our building codes and our fire codes. So that would be the reason why our police is typically not involved in that. In theory, those codes have already taken into consideration as we go about adopting them, all leadership perspectives in that regard.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Thank you. Appreciate it. All right. Any other questions?
Mr. Mayor.
Yeah.
I do for Darren, please. Darren, you said in your presentation when we first started, if I heard you correctly, that they're seeing that there was a conflict and it came down to a judgment call concerning context area 2 on properties 1, 2, and 3, I believe, and residential multifamily. Did I hear you correct when you said there was a conflict?
Mr. Mayor, council member, what I said was there was a plan zone conflict. That is that the comprehensive plan and the underlying zoning designation are not in perfect harmony. The purpose statement for the RM zone says that it will implement the policies of the context area 3 rather than 2. And so that's the disconnect. Yeah.
And that is the problem. Okay, thank you.
Okay, city staff has explained the options for council action this evening, and a sheet containing suggested motions has been provided for each council member here on the dais. I would entertain a motion that the City of Sandpoint City Council deny the appeal of Jay Scott and Leanna Nixon. City application PCUP 21-004, granting a conditional use permit for a 13-unit multifamily development at 624, 626, and 628 North Avenue and 1809 Main Street in the residential multifamily zone. This motion is made for the following reasons. And the affirmative findings on all 9 requirements for CUPs are listed in the Planning and Zoning Commission findings. And I'm not sure if you want to add any findings that we have come to this evening, but I would entertain that motion, or if the council wishes to make another motion, now's the time.
Did you say a motion to deny the appeal?
That's correct.
Second,
You'd have to make the motion.
I make that motion. I move-
Second.
Yep.
Okay,
There you go.
fair enough. It's been motioned and seconded. Is there any discussion?
Yes. Again, I did not run for, and what I promised myself to do as an elected official in a small community, we don't have the luxury to live in a big city where I can look out into the crowd and not know anybody. Everybody here is faced with that challenge in a small community. And as an elected official, I promised myself that I would always be as fair as I can and honest as I can, no matter who's sitting in front of me. I did not run for city council to make friends or get more business. That's just not the reality of the situation. I chose to run because I believed in myself and that I could be as fair and honest as possible. I would like to discuss more with some concerns, possibly play devil's advocate to make sure that we are making the absolute right decision. My concern up here today is not to fix affordable housing. You're not going to do it with this property. You're not going to do it with all the other properties. That is my personal opinion, nor is it necessarily the government's job to do so. From my experience in being in all these meetings where we're forced to make a very difficult decision in a very difficult time, it always comes down to, is this compatible with the comprehensive plan? Is this seamless? Is this the right decision? Is it clear cut? And again, we're always put in these situations where it's not always clear cut. So I want to make sure that we are making the right decision. So I do have some questions for council. If you would like to talk about it, answer them. You have no obligation to, obviously, but I'm going to bring them up. I'm still having a hard time reconciling the difficulty between residential multifamily and there being a conflict with context area 2. I completely understand property 4 being 3-story. It's context area 3, where the 3 properties facing the backyard of the property owners, that's context area 2. Do any of you guys have a concern about that? That is bugging me, and I'm having a hard time reconciling that, where it comes down to a judgment call. I can completely sympathize with landowners wanting to build whatever they want, and they have every right to want to do that, regardless of their intentions of wanting affordable or not. I could care less. Ultimately, if they want to rent it out for $10,000 an apartment, that's their choice. But I completely understand as well the property rights of them, and I completely want to respect and understand the property rights of the appellant. So, which is why I'm asking the question. I can completely understand why they feel and believe it's not harmonious with the comprehensive plan, which also would bring up issues with number 2, will be harmonious with and in accordance with the general objectives or with any specific objective of the comprehensive plan and / or applicable sections of the Sandpoint code. Number 3, will be designed, constructed, and operated and maintained to be harmonious and appropriate with the existing or intended character of the general vicinity, and that such as will not change the essential character of the same area. Again, I completely understand why a property owner would want to build this. No problem with that at all. It's not wrong at all. However, my concern would be just because 1 out of the 4 houses is possibly a 2-story by technicality, is that considered harmonious with the context area? Is it harmonious with the comprehensive plan, it being context area 2? And I could be wrong. I'm just wondering, is that the case? Although it's multifamily, it's context area 2. Is it harmonious? 3 out of the 4 properties are single family home or single family. 1 may not be, maybe an attic. I don't know. So I'm just curious. I'd like to hear your guys' opinion, how you feel about number 1, number 2, and number 3 in particular, as you see on the screen. If you want.
I struggle with you. Yeah, this is tough. Unfortunately, we have very capable, competent, intelligent, and articulate staff that helps us with good information, and we have the public that is here giving their comment to allow us to be as informed as we can be. I share with you that struggle because we sit up here and we are tasked with approving things. We have heard that we need more homes. The citizenry has said that. What we have also heard is it's a desirable looking project, but just not here. We hear that often. We have recently heard that. And that's the bookend, you know. There are many really good looking projects. And in the past, there have been places that this is not the appropriate infill, my opinion. This, I think, is an appropriate infill. And what has led me to that is what the staff has provided for us.
I appreciate that,
I
Counselor.
would concur with that. I mean, we have to trust our staff, and they have not led us astray before. And so I would concur with Councilman Grote is that, and we do need it. We absolutely do need it for workers. And in the P&Z hearing that I watched, Mrs. Friedman said that they were going to rent 20 to 30% below market. And so, you know, that's important for us right now. That's really important for us. And you know that, I mean, I'm out and about with citizens and talking to people, and it's very heartbreaking. We're going to lose a whole generation of young people if we don't provide some sort of housing for them. And I struggled with it too, because I feel for the appellant that I get that. I get that because I ask myself questions is, if somebody built in my backyard about this, how would I feel? And so I trust staff that everything that they put before us and all these copious amounts of documents that we've read and having meetings with staff, that I too come down to the opinion that this is the right project at this property.
I appreciate that, Counselor.
Did you have more, Joel?
No.
Okay. Are we still allowed to ask staff a question?
Sure.
Okay, so maybe it's Amanda, maybe it's Darren, I'm not sure. And there was a lot to take in with this stuff, so maybe I missed this. But what are the landscaping requirements?
Mr. Mayor, council member, there are fairly specific requirements in the RM section of code that we would apply at the building permit stage. The preliminary landscape plan that we have is largely in compliance, but we haven't been through it at the building permit level of check. And so it's entirely possible that we'll add additional requirements as we get into reviewing an actual application for a building permit.
And if we felt strongly as a council to add specifics to that, Fonda, is that within our?
If you want to add a specific condition with regards to landscape,
Yes.
you have specific language for that?
I could probably come up with some, yes.
Yes, that is within your ability.
Okay, and just so the council knows, I'm going this direction in the thought behind harmonious and also relative to the setbacks and the step off of the housing. And as Kate, counselor, said, sorry, that's pretty informal, that if it were in one of our backyards, how could we potentially decrease the impact that it would have on us if we were quote unquote, the word of the night, adjacent landowner. So I'm kind of putting that out there in front of the council if they feel like maybe that would be relevant to making this more harmonious in the neighborhood. So if
Mr. Mayor,
anybody wants to speak to that.
You mean like asking the owners to put in full-grown trees from a nursery or?
No, I think that's, but we do have some, and Amanda can speak to this. There are certain gauges to trees and such that we can actually require through language, whether that's a 2-inch diameter or a 3-inch diameter. And no, it would start off small, but it would be something reasonable within a 5-year time frame. And that's very similar to the type of landscaping that we did with downtown streets when we did a lot of that, where there was a specific diameter that went in with the thought that it would not take 20 years for something that's reasonable and pleasant. So
You could also specify with species like arborvitae, for instance, that actually provide a real visual barrier.
different things as such. That's not the tree I would personally pick because the snow crushes them over time. And so I don't think they're as effective as most people believe them to be. But anyway, I'm just putting that in front of council to kind of get a feeling for that. And I see that there are some in the little sketch, but I don't know if I don't know that those are required or how far along in this that has gotten.
So are you making a motion to amend and add a condition?
Well, I'm trying to get a feel for what the council.
Yeah, I'd like to speak to that. Not so much the trees. I mean, it'd be very expensive. I mean, from what I hear of the appellant is the reason it's not harmonious is I didn't hear too much concern, and I, again, could be wrong with, I guess that would be the Lincoln side, or Main Street side, those being 2-story. The concern, from what I understood, picture's gone now, would be that even though there is a setback on the 2nd story, that they'll still be overlooking the backyard. And that's the reason it's not harmonious in that particular section, is because it's mostly 1-story, not 2-story, and evasion of privacy, which is why most houses in that area are 1-story, not 2-story. So I believe the concern, I would, this is a guess, but I would argue that if that whole section was 1-story and that whole section over here was 2-story, we probably wouldn't be here tonight. It seems that the concern is it's not harmonious. And so no matter how many bushes or trees you put, we still have the same problem. I don't know if that even helps to yours, but I don't think the concern here are bushes or anything. I mean, no disrespect by that. I just.
No, that's absolutely fine. I'm not making any motions.
Okay. Are there any other motions perhaps to amend that council wants to consider? And let me suggest a couple things that were brought up there was the request by the applicant to accommodate a purchase of 10 feet of property to the south. And I guess the question to the council would be, would you be willing to allow, to approve this project as it is before you, and also allow for movement of the structure 10 feet to the south with the purchase of 10 feet of property to the south?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay, so perhaps you'd like to make a motion to amend to include that as a condition.
I move to amend the motion to add the condition of the applicant being able to purchase the property to move the building 10 feet forward.
And that would be in place of having to, recess the upper story by 10 feet.
Correct. To remove what P and Z, the condition P and Z put on.
So there's a motion to amend. Is there a second?
Second.
Mr. Mayor, just for point of clarification, if that ends up being the circumstance, if this is approved or the appeal is denied and that amended motion is approved and that is the circumstance, if the redesign of the project to accommodate the acquisition of the 10 feet ends up being substantially different than what you've seen, I don't want the applicant to be deceived. There may be a recommendation by legal counsel and or planning staff that this go back through the the P and Z hearing process. I can't say that it wouldn't.
Yeah,
So-
that's a great point. I appreciate you bringing that up, Fonda. So that would be a conditional condition.
Well, I just want everybody, I want to be transparent. It's not an approval tonight to say if they acquire and redesign that automatically this is approved,
Right.
because we don't know what that redesign is going to elicit at that point.
Okay, so could we make that ultimate condition conditional to the next level of review? The applicant would have to come forward with proof that they've purchased that property. And they would have to come back with a revised site plan. And that would have to still meet the condition. So, but at that point, it would be an administrative process.
It would be an administrative decision at that point as to whether or not there's been a substantial enough change to proceed with the existing conditional use permit, or it be an application for an amended conditional use permit, which would go back through the planning and zoning process.
Okay, so is everybody in agreement with that? That's the lay of the land here?
Personally, no, not because I don't think it's a good idea. I just don't think it's the best option personally.
Okay. But the motion and the second are in favor of that, and they understand the terms here. Okay. So we should, are there any other comments or that you want to make on the motion to amend?
To be clear, we're going to be voting on the motion purely to amend, correct?
Yep, the 10-foot allowing for the applicant to, in place of having to meet the planning and zoning's condition of setting back the upper story by 10 feet, they can come back to the city with proof of having purchased the 10 feet of the property to the south. And they can come back with a revised site plan that demonstrates that where they've shifted the building to 10 feet to the south. And that new site plan has to meet all of the code conditions and all of the standards. It will be reviewed by staff, and at that point, staff and legal will make a determination of whether or not that requires further review by Planning and Zoning Commission. If it does, it'll go back through the process. If it does not, then it will just be approved administratively.
Let me ask a question, Mr. Mayor.
Yeah.
Is it possible funds for legal say it has to go through the planning and zoning and they still want to require that setback? That's possible still? And then,
Planning and zoning has discretion to evaluate the application anew.
so it's not a guarantee. Okay, thank you. Just want to make sure.
Okay. There's a, I'm sorry. There's a motion and a second to, on the motion to amend. This will be a roll call vote.
Counselor Rule,
No.
Counselor Dick,
No.
Counselor Sparrow,
No.
Counselor Groot,
Yes.
Counselor McAllister.
Yes.
Motion to amend fails.
You still have your pending motion. Your
Yeah,
underlying
I'm
motion.
thinking that there was another potential motion to amend that I want to remind council that perhaps they want to consider.
It was the tree stuff.
I've got- What's that?
I think that we're talking about the trees.
No, I think
I
it
dropped
wasn't
it.
that one. Forgive me, my pile of papers here. Hmm.
Mr. Mayor, members of the council, if I might, Amanda, could we have those conditions again, please, from the P and Z?
Oh, thank you, Darren. That's thoughtful.
I just want to point out that the Planning and Zoning Commission's condition of approval said that the upper story had to be 15 feet from the property line. It didn't say how the applicants had to achieve that. So they could achieve it either by articulating the building and bringing the upper story 10 feet further back, or they could achieve it by acquiring additional property to the south and moving the entire building 15 feet away from the property line. The matter of acquiring the additional property is that the property in question already has to go through a lot line adjustment to combine all 4 parcels into a single parcel. And so adding an additional 10 feet to the south, were the applicants able to obtain that land, would be administratively approvable through the lot line adjustment process that they have to do anyway. And so it's my opinion, and I would look to Fonda to see if I'm off base here, but it's my opinion that the way that condition is written, it gives the applicant the ability to meet the condition either way.
Thank you, Darren. That's really helpful.
It is.
Appreciate that. That's why you get paid the big bucks. Okay, so we're back to the main motion, unless there's any other amendments that the council wants to consider.
Can we clarify the motion again?
The motion, yes, is to deny the appeal of Jay Scott and Leanna Nixon, and approve city application PCUP 21-0004, granting a conditional use permit for a 13-unit multifamily development, blah, blah, blah.
Thank you.
Okay.
This might be a question for legal. And again, thank you everybody for being here. One thing that, again, I don't want to ever be afraid to admit that I might be wrong on certain things, or maybe didn't make the best judgment call. As Darren just spoke to what he just did, and Darren, thank you so much for doing that. Something popped into my head that maybe, Mr. Mayor, your motion to amend, given the opportunity for the applicant to give them an opportunity to purchase that property, to not have to revisit their plan, and to keep it the 2-story. It seemed as they really wanted that. And also it would have given the opportunity, say they do that, for the appellant to possibly not have it so much encroaching as close to their property. And it kind of just clicked as Darren was talking about, to take that opportunity away from the appellant and the applicant. I don't know how it works legally to possibly bring that back to the table to revisit that. We can talk about it. But so denying that, me with my vote, adding to that denial, seems as though it takes away a possible benefit if it were to pass the final motion. Your original motion takes away an opportunity for the benefit of the appellant and the benefit of the applicant. If I'm not being clear, please let me know.
Would you like to renew the motion to amend?
I would like to renew the motion to amend. Correct. In legal terms, yes.
Okay, and that, we can do that? That
Yeah.
actually doesn't normally happen. So you're
This is the
making the motion
first.
to amend.
Correct.
You just
And
voted
I
down. Okay.
recall in my,
Do that or reverse his vote, but I think it's cleaner to just renew the
Okay.
motion to amend the underlying motion.
Okay, this is a first. We haven't done this yet.
yeah. yeah.
Okay. So there's a new motion, the one we just
Second,
had.
just for the,
Yeah.
so I'll
Well,
second him just because he
You,
wants to go there.
wow, okay. This
Well, I
is-
mean, he wants to have an opportunity. I'm going to provide
Okay,
him the
let-
opportunity.
For
Sure.
Robert's rules, I think we have to.
All right. Okay, so there's a motion and a second. Is any further deliberation? This will be a roll call vote.
Counselor Rule,
No.
Counselor Dick,
No.
Counselor Sparrow,
Yes.
Counselor McAllister,
Yes.
Counselor Groot.
Yes.
Okay. Amendment passes. Now we're back to the main motion. I think we're ready for a vote. Are we ready for a vote? This will be a roll call vote.
Counselor McAllister,
Yes.
Counselor Sparrow,
No.
Counselor Dick,
No.
Counselor Groot,
Yes.
Counselor Rule.
Yes.
Motion passes. And with that, this meeting is adjourned.